gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Let Jesus work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Please, your Father, would work it out. Oh, let God work it out. Oh, work it out. You work it out for Mother Lisa. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling. Sometimes I'm gaining, then again I'm losing. Sometimes I'm rising, yes sir. Then again I'm falling.
All right. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This is David Patrick Harry with Church of the Eternal Logos. And today I have author, researcher, John Klyczek with me today. How are you doing today, brother?
I'm doing very good. Thank you for having me, sir.
Hey, I really appreciate you sending me the recent article. It overlaps with so much of the topics that I've kind of been discussing and even academic research that I'm putting together that you introduced a person to me that I really wasn't that familiar with, Barbara Marx Hubbard. And I'm pretty excited for our conversation today because you've been doing some great research looking into how the New Age spirituality connects with some of the Malthusian technocrats and the transhumanist agenda. So welcome, brother. I remember, I think we met at the Freedom Fest, wasn't it, like a couple years ago?
Yeah, Cause Fest. Yeah.
What was it?
Cause Fest. It was something creative artists uniting for the sovereignty of everyone. It was Courtney Turner's event.
That's what it was. Yeah, it was Courtney Turner's event. And I remember we had a really good conversation. And so finally we've been able to make it happen. And I really appreciate you sending that to me. And yeah, looking forward to you diving into some of your research and sharing some of your insights with the audience tonight. So,
yes, sir.
I guess to get started, describe a little bit. So I'm going to show people the article. We're not going to go over the specifics yet. I just want to introduce people to a project that you're working on. You've been writing several articles here concerning Barbara Marx Hubbard and sort of Malthusian transhumanism. What is the research project that you're kind of putting together?
Well, it was kind of a fluke. My wheelhouse is really education, and in particular education technology. My book is up here on the shelf here. It's the School World Order, the Technocratic Globalization of Corporatized Education. It builds on the research of Charlotte Thompson Iserbyt, who worked under the Reagan administration. She blew the whistle on something called Project Best. So it dives into the way that technocracy through public-private partnerships has been sort of gaining steam since at least the 80s, but really longer than that. And I kind of wanted to take a break from, looking at the education end of technocracy in the fourth industrial revolution. So I asked Whitney Webb if she had any topics she'd want me to cover, maybe take a break. And so she sent me this clip. She wanted me to do a profile piece on Barbara Marx Hubbard. And so it's going to be, I think, a 4-part series. And pretty much a book length series. When I sent you those 3 articles, I was like, man, I hope he doesn't think I want him to read all these, because they're about 8 words a piece. And they did the math on them. I'm like, that's almost with the 4th one, it's close to 120 pages, I think. So it'll almost be over. It's provided some insights into my main topic of research. So I'll be tying it back into that type of stuff. But she sent me this infamous meme. There's a quote in there where Barbara Marx Hubbard says something to the effect of that in order for us to consciously evolve, that there will need to be a culling of 1/4 of the human population. She says that the people that are going to do that are, she calls those the riders of the pale horse. And so a lot of the project was really just kind of pinning down whether or not that was a legit quote. Turns out it was a long and sort of circuitous journey, but here's a physical copy of it that I got from Constance Cumby. She had given me a digital copy, but she also gave me this physical copy. I've been visiting over there pretty regularly for about over a year now. But in the whole process of researching Hubbard, I found out that she was tied into a lot of very important people, institutions, and movements. So at the crux of everything is a concept that she has that's called conscious evolution. Now, it's recently I've stumbled on, and this was part of my time with Constance Cumby. She gave me quite a bit of theosophical literature, and I finally stumbled on to where Alice Bailey is really the person who coined the term conscious evolution. So really it's a theosophical term. Now, the reason it took me a while to get there with it is because Hubbard never makes any explicit, or at least in everything that I've read, which is most of her actual books. She published a lot of these spiral notebook type things that she did. She gave out at conferences. So I've got a few of those too. Maybe somewhere in there she mentions Bailey or theosophy, but in nothing I've read could I find it. But it's that term, right? That term comes from Bailey. So what is conscious evolution? Basically, an easy way to understand it in terms of the fourth industrial revolution is it sort of combines transhumanism and sustainable development. And in doing so, it sort of combines also the predecessors to those, which one would be eugenics being the predecessor to transhumanism, and then Malthusian population control sort of being a predecessor to sustainable development. And so in looking at how all those things come together in her concept of conscious evolution, I came across her connections to quite a few people, and I'll just name some of the important ones, and then we can dive into whichever topic or individual you'd like. So a lot of these, some of these people include Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, who was a Jesuit priest and a eugenicist. You have Abraham Maslow, who is the founding father of humanistic psychology. Jonas Salk, who is the guy that is credited with inventing the polio vaccine. Buckminster Fuller, who had it was called Design Science Revolution. It's basically proto-sustainable development, architecture, and engineering. Then you have Lawrence Rockefeller, was one of the 5 Rockefeller brothers. He ran the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and Venrock was a venture capital firm, was also involved in sustainable development stuff. Then you have Maurice Strong, who set up well, pretty much the entire UN environmental program. We'll break down all the particulars there. And then also Mikhail Gorbachev, right? So the first and only president of the Soviet Union. And all these people in one way or another sort of team up with her to either push the transhumanism or the sustainable development, or maybe something like the human potential psychology, all of them sort of coalescing to drive what she calls conscious evolution. Right.
Well, and this idea of conscious evolution, again, we've been hammering on transhumanism, and as you point out in your article, you know, Pierre Teilhard de Chardin, some transhumanists enjoy the omega point theory. Some kind of push away because of its overt religious overtones. But as you point out with Barbara Marx Hubbard, that within her New Age spirituality, I mean, it is a sort of spiritual orientation in regards to, again, population control. And we'll introduce what you mean, because you've titled it Malthusian-Transhumanist, what you mean by that for anybody listening who may not be familiar. But this stuff is explicit, that it really is, whether they're explicit about their own religious devotion or orientation, it really is, whether it be secular or explicit, a religious orientation towards an omega point, a singularity, as the Kurzweils of the world and the Yuval Noah Hararis want to reframe it. And in the video that you sent me, this omega point really is the inversion of Christ. So it's this abstract understanding that Christ consciousness is sort of utilized as a nomenclature to replace the actual logos, to replace the belief in an incarnate God, and create a sort of abstract conscious awareness of the new human species that's going to emerge due to evolutionary conditions in our relationship with technology.
Yeah. You know, the very concept of conscious evolution, or rather Christ consciousness, that's again a theosophical thing, right? I mean, you know, it could go further back, but that term, you have people like Bailey and others, Ledbetter, etc., using the term the reappearance of the Christ, right? And so for them, they refer to it as like an office, right? And it's an office based on another term for it would basically be the ascended masters. So for them, Buddha and Muhammad and you name some ancient religious teacher of a world religion, that they were all basically ascended masters, and they all had Christ consciousness. And so it's basically just this pursuit of enlightenment, and that it's the pursuit of enlightenment, the pursuit of knowledge, basically is the crux of evolution. And as you know, in de Chardin's theory, rather than salvation being an individual thing through theosis, your relationship with Christ, it's this collective thing through sort of the zenith of all of our collective conscious, all of our intelligence manifests through technology, creating sort of this new collective species. So for de Chardin, he has this concept of, and this is, you can sort of think of it as basically synonymous with conscious evolution, but he talks about basically noospheric evolution or noetic evolution. It's an evolution of what he calls the noosphere. So in his theory, essentially, the intelligence of the universe sort of first created matter and energy, and then out of matter created sort of a biosphere, and then out of that biosphere, the apex of that is the human species, and it's through the human species which developed a higher level of sentience, a type of consciousness that enabled the universe to basically know itself. Now, through that consciousness, sort of the pinnacle of our consciousness, our knowledge, is our ability to manipulate the environment through science and technology. So our consciousness then creates another layer of material phenomena that augments and enhances our intelligence and consciousness by merging with it. And at that point, this is where we're getting to the singularity or the omega point. And we basically have this collective evolution. For someone like Hubbard, she actually said that she referred to social media in particular, and she even mentions like the specific companies, Facebook, Twitter, and things, that those are going to create the planetary cybernetic nervous system that will enable this collective conscious evolution.
I call it the cybernetic skeleton of Satan.
Yeah, well, and I thought I had sent you a clip, but I think I sent you a different one. But I had spoken not too long ago at a conference with a friend of mine, Michael O'Fallon, and he did a presentation on sort of the noosphere and that whole theory. And he looked at a map. I don't remember where he got, but he looked at a map of basically it looks like Elon Musk. It's a map of Elon Musk's Starlink grid. So it's kind of like what it looks like is, if you know what a buckyball is, it's
Yep.
it's sort of a colloquial term for a
Pulling up
geodesic
people who aren't
dome.
aware.
For people that don't know what a geodesic dome is, it's it's like a house that's built out of hexagons, and it's like a dome. It's a dome, but the idea here is that instead of all the weight being on particular pillars, right, like corner posts, etc., all the weight is equally distributed between all the points on the sort of where the hexagons meet in the dome. So if you look at this map of the noosphere, yeah, that's basically it. A lot of the Epcot stuff at Disney looked like that too. It was based on Buckminster Fuller's stuff. That I don't want to digress. But the map of the Starlink satellites look basically just like that. And there's other, I bet you if you type in noosphere images or noosphere planet, you'll also see very similar designs. And if you think of Elon Musk, right, he's got the satellites, right? So there it goes, right? I think that's the exact image that was used in the presentation that he did. But if you think of all of his satellites being the nodes, right, on that grid, and then how we're connected to it through his social media company, right? And then I think somebody pontificated that possibly the Omega medallion he had on his that he was wearing at the UFC event not too long ago is a tip of the hat towards the Omega point and the noosphere and all of that. So it's interesting that he's sort of in charge of a lot of the technologies that are going to create the system that Hubbard talked about, and then the imagery that they use to represent it is basically the same stuff that. By the way, she was very close friends with Buckminster Fuller, though. But he was another guy that believed he had a Christ consciousness experience. I don't remember if he thought he saw an apparition. He certainly heard a voice, and the voice told him he is one of the first mini Christ or something like that. And he shares this information with Hubbard. And she was like, "Oh, I had the same experience." And she says they held each other. And she said I don't know, psychically, I think the word was zapped him, and she downloaded all his knowledge about the design science revolution. So, anyways,
that I'm not surprised with their new age paradigm. That's pretty interesting. I wasn't aware of that one. But as you bring up in the video that you sent me, and I'll pull up the images again. This was pretty interesting. We're not going to play the video, but just to summarize, and curious what your general thoughts are. I've been bringing up, and I've done a few streams on Elon concerning him being sort of the ultimate gaslighter, and how he says one thing, does another thing, and kind of plays both sides of the fence. And this video is talking about this necklace, as you mentioned, that he was wearing at the UFC event, the one where Trump, he won the election, won the popular vote. I think, Congressman Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, was there. RFK was there. Tulsi Gabbard went. And so he kind of had his crew with him. And people were speculating about this necklace that Elon had, which is a sort of all-seeing eye inside of an Omega, Greek, the last letter of the Greek alphabet. And this video kind of talks about the interesting connection. People are speculating, and a speculation for maybe why it is that the Omega being the last letter of the Greek alphabet, if you look at the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, it looks like an X. And so obviously he's branding all his companies X, which was his first company that he started. It was kind of a PayPal light payment processing system that eventually got incorporated into what would become PayPal. But now he's, reigniting the development of what he would consider a Western WeChat, where it's an all-in-one app. He wants your banking. He wants your social media. Eventually your social credit score. All this will be on his singular app. And so we've talked about how he goes on Rogan and describes transhumanism, describes AI as the ultimate existential threat to humanity. And his resolution to that is not to shut down research, even though he says we have to be cautious. It's that we need to use his Neuralink and fuse with it. And so in one stream, I went to the Neuralink website and literally showed how their mission objective is to unite mankind with the artificial intelligence so that we will not be annihilated by it, because we will be one with it. And so that was kind of the point of the gaslighting. And I've speculated myself that what X is a data mining operation, that he can utilize his AI bots, and he can sort of calculate global discourse and all this different stuff. And so this video is connecting this utilization of like the last letter of the alphabet being both X in the Hebrew and Omega in the Greek, as sort of signifying his thrust towards the Omega point, towards a sort of technological singularity in which most of his companies are going to be incredibly profitable as we move closer and closer to that, right? So the irony is he's kind of hitched his wagon to the populist national rhetoric of Donald Trump. Meanwhile, everything that he's doing is an explicit transhumanist globalist operation.
Yeah. I mean, so you threw in Neuralink there. I mean, that's sort of so we tied in the satellites to the social media networks, the brain-computer interface would essentially, quite literally make that entire grid sort of part of your physical nervous system, right? Sort of interfacing the two. But then he's also, it was his grandpa, Joshua Haldeman. This is the guy that was part of something called Technocracy Inc. in Canada, and basically got kicked out of the country. It was like charged as an enemy of the state or something. Technocracy Inc. was sort of a fascist movement during World War II. And so, his ambitions for technocracy go a long ways back. And to your point about sort of using X as a data mining operation to sort of control, various demographics, maybe to play off civil strife, be able to gamify popular opinion and steer it towards, whatever endeavors he might have politically or in terms of business. I think of, the buckyball is really, as much as it is, obviously you can see that it never really caught on, right? There's not a lot of geodesic domes, right? I know you went to school in Illinois. You might remember driving down 57. There's one off on the side. It's like one of the few that I've ever seen.
Yep. I know exactly what you're talking about.
But theoretically, I think theoretically it has more to do with it's sort of a model for how to cybernetically steer systems dynamics and group dynamics. So something that I stumbled into doing this, it didn't make its way into the articles, it's making its way into other things I'm working on, is something called systems dynamics. It actually relates to this whole Malthusian sustainable development thing, because it was formulated first for like supply chain dynamics. It was basically they're nonlinear sort of computational models of how complex systems develop and evolve. So a guy named J.W. Forrester, he's working at MIT. He came up with the concept, sort of ironed it out, working on supply chain stuff for General Electric. But then he would work on the computer models for the Club of Rome's Limit to Growth, which basically kind of set the stage for the Malthusian bent of what later becomes the sustainable development movement. In the systems dynamics, okay, you can look at population dynamics, you could look at health dynamics, you could look at supply chain dynamics, but all of these systems dynamics kind of work together, right? Healthcare, education, the workforce, right? The idea of if you look at something like Rand Corporation, actually has it's called systems of systems. So in other words, it's the same thing of systems dynamics, but it's like sort of having a cybernetic steersman that controls or coordinates all of the systems dynamics together, and then the group dynamics within that. So the group dynamics under the systems dynamics would be, again, right, institutional, corporate, business, sort of the meta level ways that human beings interact in a society. The group dynamics would be more the cultural stuff. So, right, maybe religious, maybe ethnic, maybe gender, right, maybe age groups. The idea is that theoretically in a buckyball, if you push on one of the nodes, that energy disperses equally, right, to all the other nodes. So if you can data mine, right, the group dynamics within the system's dynamics, right, and you can galvanize sort of that sentiment around maybe a popular figure or, right, some trendy, right, you can sort of get large groups of people, entire institutions to move in one direction by applying pressure onto one of the system's nodes, right? So, I mean, I think that something like X is a perfect system for that, right? Because it's looking at all of that in real time, right? And it's also interactive. So it's not just looking at, you know, sort of the sentiments, but like it can actually engage you, right? With bots, sort of trigger you, right? Work on your emotions, you get you riled up. So
speak a little bit to, because one of the interesting things that I was wanting to get your thoughts on before we dive into the article is you're talking about, you know, Thomas Malthus and his Malthusian understanding of like exponential population growth and the limit of resources, Earth resources, to sustain that population. And we've talked before about, you know, Schwab and the WEF and all these international corporations and organizations that are in favor of a depopulation agenda. But Musk has been, and this could be one of his another, you know, counter signaling things, which I speculate, you know, his sort of Roman salute that he did a couple days ago seems to kind of go in the same vibe of this sort of counter signaling, doing one thing and then doing the opposite. But he's been very explicit among some of the technocratic elites that we are in a population decline, and this is a tragedy, that people need to have more babies. Could you speak a little bit to Malthusianism amongst these technocrats and these transhumanists, and how do you fit Elon Musk's rhetoric in there? Is he somebody who's just trying to recognize what they're doing and sort of counter signal? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, as far as what Elon Musk is doing with it, I think that, I think it's, to use your phrase, sort of a counter signal. You know, as a martial artist, I would call it a feint, right?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like getting you to knowing that people are going to respond to that while, right, you're actually working on another angle. That's what I would speculate. As far as like where the technocrats line up on it, it's interesting. There actually is kind of a spectrum in there, right? Barbara Marx Hubbard was, in some ways, right, despite the wants to cull 1/4 of the human population quote, she buried that and didn't want it to come back out. It followed her though, so. But she had arguments with people like Aurelio Pecci, who was one of the founders of the Club of Rome. And she thought that a lot of the Club of Rome people, these are the people that did Limits to Growth, and then later the sequel to that, Beyond the Limits. And then there was the other one, The First Global Revolution, or something like that, where the quote is something like, "We have found the enemy and it is humanity," right? Like we are the cause. It says something like pollution.
We're the carbon, that's the problem.
Yeah, because the pollution and all that is secondary, right? It's the people that cause it. So if you get rid of the people, right, you know, that's you're nipping it in the bud. But you know, Malthusianism sort of has a long history. It's interesting because it actually ties into the eugenics as well. So what a lot of people don't know is it was Malthus's theory, right? This idea of, you know, that basically that the population will always outgrow our ability to produce food. Now, this is, I want to say he's in the 1700s, right? We didn't quite have, you know, the Industrial Revolution, figure out how to get fertilizer out of the air. You know, I mean, so things happened over time where we said, well, maybe he was a little too bleak on that. But it was his theory that that because there's limited resources, species compete over those limited resources, and whoever wins the competition, right? This is where Darwin gets his theory from. He explicitly says this, and I think it's in his biography. And so he says that that's sort of the mechanism for evolution, right? So over time, right, when they developed like contraception and stuff, then they started to call it neo-Malthusianism, because for Malthus, he basically, they didn't have contraception and stuff. So he basically said you either have to, you know, one, abstain from making babies, and then basically said, you know, don't feed the poor because there's only so much to go around. And if you feed them, then basically, you know, they're just, everybody's going to be hungry. And then, you know, you're going to have what they call the Malthusian.
Yeah, certainly not an antichrist spirit behind that or anything like that.
Yeah, well, he was a reverend too. I'm not sure what denomination he would have been. But so the neo-Malthusians were very big on birth control, etc. But then they also would have dovetailed with the eugenicists in terms of basically at this point, the neo-Malthusians are concerned with the quantity of population, but the eugenicists are concerned with the quality of population. Right. And so it's Darwin's building on Malthus. Then Darwin comes up with this theory of evolution. Then his cousin Galton says, oh, we can like harness this, right, through selective breeding, which they call positive eugenics, right? It's basically the elites inbreeding. And then negative eugenics, which is where it's the culling, right? And so this would have been sterilization, euthanasia, abortion, stuff like that. And so the neo-Malthusians and the eugenicists sort of came together on that, right? Not every Malthusian is a eugenicist, but pretty much every eugenicist is a Malthusian. And so this philosophy gets sort of ramped up in institutions like the Club of Rome. It's sort of the driver behind stuff like the one-child policy in China, and there was a big sterilization campaign in India around the same time. And then later they would have what's called, so they had several world population conferences, the United Nations, and then they started calling them international population conferences. And then one of them in, I think it's early 90s, it's early 90s or 70s or 90s. It's got to be 90s. The specific date is in the article if you go check it out. Pretty sure it's 90s though. It's like the IDCP International Conference on Population and Development. And at this point, a lot of people in, what they call the third world were like, yeah, we don't really like these Malthusian policies. So what they did was they said they don't like the top down stuff. So they're still concerned about population. So this is where they changed, instead of like forcible sterilization, one-child policies, they shifted to what they called basically, women's rights, right? The women's move. So the theory was this: you don't have to force people to get sterilized and have abortions and stuff. If you encourage women to go into the workforce and to have careers, if you encourage a woman to go have a career, you're going to have to encourage her to go into higher education. So therefore, she's going to have to postpone making a baby. And if you give her access to healthcare, which basically means contraception and potentially abortion, then she will voluntarily remove herself from the reproductive sweepstakes. Now, moving forward into the future, and by the way, there's a clause in that conference that is carried over into the tenets of Agenda 2030. Right. So what I'm trying to get at here is that, when people, if you look at Agenda 2030, you're not going to really find like overpopulation references, but there's a clause in there that references the agreement they made at the Cairo conference, which is where they said basically that they want to have a voluntary Malthusian movement through, what they call this women's rights thing. If you think forward, right? If they had a Malthusian goal for encouraging women's access to the workplace and healthcare, etc. Think about the transgender thing. Right. If you can, the woman could change her mind at any point and say, I'm going to go ahead and make babies. If you remove or chemically castrate or alter some, they're done. Right. And so I would surmise that as an extension of, gender equality, that the transgender thing is as much a Malthusian ploy as was the first round of the gender stuff.
Absolutely. And in your article, there's a section there talking about family planning and euthanasia. And, immediately comes to mind is these new policies that they're implementing in parts of Western Europe, but Canada most specifically, that is literally legalizing and promoting euthanasia amongst the population. And, these Malthusian ethics that are behind these technocrats, I mean, it's so in our face. I did a whole stream talking about synthetic wombs, and more recently in a sponsored stream, I work with an Orthodox non-for-profit that's been translating some eschatological prophecies and comments on elders. And there's a book called Elders on the End Times that comes out of a monastery in Romania. And in it, there's a section of a saint talking specifically about, as we approach the end times, sex will no longer be about reproduction. Sex itself, the sexual act, will be solely about pleasure, and that we're going to enter an age in which reproduction will be done by synthetic means, and it will be planned and orchestrated. And so in your article, I think you mentioned CRISPR at some point, and seeing these genetic engineering that's, put forth in our society, that it's clear where we can see all this stuff going in regards to it's a kind of new form of eugenics. So, and that was another thing. We'll say this before we get into your article, but, you mentioned the eugenics movement and de Chardin in the article, and Julian Huxley pops up at a brief little snippet there in the article. And he was major eugenics. I have a whole section on him. And you mentioned the article that coined transhumanism, new bottles for new wine. And for them, there was a sort of explicit understanding of racial consciousness and the differences between races in regards to their eugenic program. And then now with the sort of DEI and the sort of progressive ethos of, I don't want to be too explicit, but certainly the promotion of interracial relationships. Not that there's anything wrong per se if you fall in love with somebody. That I'm not saying that, but certainly there's an effort here. If you watch American television, every commercial, it's quite in your face. So curious what your thoughts are about the sort of the eugenics program seems to be well alive, and the transhumanist movement and many of the more intellectual and academic thinkers in that movement have been trying to distance themselves from eugenics, because really that's where it comes from. But at the same time, when they talk about this sort of genetic engineering and how we're going to construct the DNA and genetics of people in the future, it's still eugenics. But could you speak a little bit to at least what you're seeing, or maybe you don't, but it appears to be a sort of difference in the eugenics movement from that of the late 1800s, early 1900s, and the sort of transhumanist eugenic movement today?
Yeah. So, it's interesting. Hitler was probably the most hardcore as far as like trying to like purify to make the Ubermensch, right, to purify the race or the species. But a lot of eugenicists, they didn't necessarily want to like get rid of everybody, right? Like they wanted to minimize the amount of people, like that, serfs and peasants of varying ethnicities. But a lot of them kind of fell on what I would call like sort of the bell curve spectrum, post 80s, right? Like sort of the bell curve eugenicists. If you've ever read the book Charles Murray, and you just look through the citations, it's like most of it is old school eugenicists, and a bunch of the other ones are people from the Pioneer Fund. I can't remember, like Arthur Jensen and Felipe J. Rushton, and there's a bunch of them, Linda Gottfredson, where, what. And Julian Huxley says something very similar in UNESCO, Its Purpose and Its Philosophy. It's that like, it's not necessarily like variance in culture or ethnicity per se that's the problem. Like he says, that type of diversity is good. He says, but what we can't tolerate is like too much basically stupidity, right? Like IQ, like aptitude, right? And so as far as like bell curve stuff, they would have been happy to, bring somebody into the fold that could, carry their own intellectual weight, right? Or could be useful in the upper tiers of the hierarchy in some way. The way that it sort of transforms into transhumanism today. So you mentioned new bottles for new wine, which I'm sure you realize, or, you picked up on, is sort of another, I guess, Luciferian, satanic inversion of a biblical, right? Biblical passage.
Well, he explicitly refers to Prometheus. I mean, and science or transhumanism essentially being the Promethean process for the future. So it's very explicitly Luciferian.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier, like, conscious evolution. Like some people might think it's spiritual, some people might not. If you just think of, the Nazi movement and the Soviet movement, I mean, all of them are trying to create the new human, the new man, right? Whether it's the Ubermensch or the new Soviet man. And you could think of those largely as political movements. But as I go into in the article, there was a lot of interesting Soviet American exchanges between Hubbard and some of the Soviets. And the Nazis were deeply into the occult there. But as far as transhumanism in New Bottles for New Wine, basically what he says is like, we can still do old school eugenics stuff, and we should, he said, we can do the culling, and we can do the, some of the selective breeding and, all that type of stuff. He says, but the main way that evolution actually occurs today is through machines and ideas, right? So basically through technology and culture. Right. And so a lot of what Hubbard was trying to do was change the culture, right? It was sort of change the culture to be compliant or, amenable to the technological changes that we were going to go through. So instead of trying to sort of selectively breed or even, genetically engineer sort of the new human, that we could sort of tinker around with the biology. He wouldn't have said neurotech and stuff like that because we didn't have it yet. But the idea was that, right, we were moving towards a way in which we would interface with machines. And so, moving to the modern era of Neuralink and, basically commercially available brain computer interfaces. Right. Essentially, you used to have, used to think of nature and nurture, right? It went during sort of the heyday of the Industrial Revolution and sort of the specialization of academia, right? This psychology and biology, nature and nurture, right? It's your genes or it's the environment. This was kind of, in some ways, I don't think a lot of people actually were that sort of narrow-minded about it. Academia was in a place where everybody was digging down into their specialization. Probably always with the looking down the road to an interdisciplinary or transdisciplinary synthesis of the two. But basically what they figured was that, in terms of creating the new human, you would either have to condition that person, right, through the proper rewards and punishments, right, sort of the B.F. Skinner's like sort of Walden utopia. Think of social credit system, right? If you could set up enough deterrence all through the culture and the institutions of the public sphere and private services, that you could sort of condition people to behave accordingly.
It's like a cybernetic behaviorism.
Yeah, and exactly, and conversely, the geneticists, right, the eugenicists, they would have been like, well, no, you got to breed it out, right? You'll never condition away what's embedded in the genes. With transhumanism, basically, you're sort of synthesizing the two, and you're basically directly conditioning the mind through the biology, through the physiology, with technology, basically with electrical inputs, right? Replacing the chemical inputs with electrical inputs.
No, yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny how this stuff is so explicit. And I mentioned backstage before we got going, and I'm going to bring this up now before we dive into your article. But, the Stargate Project Stargate that Trump just signed on behalf of Larry Ellison, the CEO and owner of Oracle, who is a major promoter of technocracy. And this is just one Fortune article. And you just search Larry Ellison and techno surveillance or something like that. These things will pop up where he talks about and predicts that the rise of modern surveillance state where citizens will be on their best behavior. In my dystopian mind, I think that we all have like a dog shock collar that our AI overlord is controlling us through, again, a sort of Skinnerian behaviorism and conditioning our impulses and our actions related to, wrong think, what you post online and all this different stuff. And this Project Stargate, for anybody who's not aware, we talked a little bit about it in the last stream, but this is a $500 billion, the largest investment ever into building a supercomputer and what is intended to be the ultimate AI system ever created. And we saw Sam Altman, the sort of squirmy little punk behind OpenAI. I really can't stand to look at that guy. And he was there with Larry Ellison, and Trump was gleefully smiling while this was getting signed through one of his executive orders, where they're essentially investing in the United States to build the ultimate AI, which they claim is going to be able to provide us cancer vaccines using the mRNA platform. And I've talked before that I see this mRNA as, where you delineate the first stage of this sort of transhumanist tiptoe. That's up for debate. But I would argue at least one of the more explicit ones is altering people's DNA through these mRNA platform technologies. And that's really what they are. And the fact that the U.S. government, and of course, Trump was behind Operation Warp Speed, and from what I was hearing on X through people that had friends in Trump's inner circle, is that he is absolutely convinced that Operation Warp Speed was like a phenomenal thing that he's very, very proud of. And it sounded like Dan Bongino, one of the conservative pundits formerly on Fox, he's been very outspoken in regards to condemnation towards the jabs and the mRNA platform. And he made it sound like in a tweet, or I guess a post on X, that he tried to confront Trump about this and Trump won't have any of it. And that he's convinced that, Operation Warp Speed and what he was a part of saved millions and millions of lives, not realizing that it's actually ushering in the exact opposite, which is a sort of CRISPR light genetic phenomenon of altering our genes and moving us towards this ultimate synthesis with technology. And so, I want to kind of get your thoughts on this. We kind of just briefly discussed it backstage, but in our think tank last night with members on my website, we were specifically speaking on this Project Stargate project and how it's so interesting that, regards to some of the domestic issues, the official U.S. policy is only male and female, which is, just getting back to, sanity to some sense. That there's so many things that you can like, especially the EOs, the executive orders that he signed on his first day back in office. There's so many domestic issues that we're quote unquote winning on. But at the same time, when I'm seeing Project Stargate, when I'm seeing the increased censorship regarding Israel specifically, so I mentioned to you that Harvard has just changed their free speech code, and essentially you cannot criticize Zionism or Israel is like the official policy of Harvard as of 2 days ago, which is expected to spread to other major universities. The first day that TikTok came back, they banned the expression Free Palestine. So it's like what I feel like what we're seeing here is the U.S., let's say the technocratic overlords have recognized that they couldn't stop the populist support for Donald Trump and some of his domestic policies that he wants to push forth. And so in a sense, and I kind of see it'd be interested what your thoughts are on Elon Musk hitching his wagon to Trump after the first assassination attempt. It's like some of these guys have just decided, hey, why don't we just join him and allow for some type of, as you said, a reprieve of the ailments that have been we've been faced with for the last few years, or some type of prosperity, American prosperity in the name of sort of conservative nationalist populism, and just use that as an economic engine to essentially build Babylon, build our AI God that they clearly have faith in. And you see Elon Musk and Larry Ellison and, the ADL, Prime Minister of Israel, Bibi Netanyahu, both come out immediately in defense of Elon Musk after his Roman salute. But what are your kind of thoughts on I know that was a lot there, but that general framing of this new Trump era, what he's coining the golden age of America? And I suspect that we will see some domestic prosperity, which would be beneficial. I'm trying to buy a house and have some babies with my wife. That maybe that would be much more feasible in the near future than before. But really what's just happening is there's sort of a process in which there's an exchange of acquiescing to the American populace in exchange for creating this technocratic system.
Yeah, with you laid a lot out. So let's start with my main concerns with Trump for the second time around has to do with his Middle East policy.
Mm-hmm.
Right. In some ways, I wonder if he was the man for that job, because if you think about, I think that if they want to ramp things up in the Middle East, in Gaza and Israel in particular, they can get that done, I think, more efficiently with Trump in particular, but just Republicans in general. Like if you just think about, Republicans and Democrats having to at least rhetorically placate their base, there is a huge, there is a bigger chunk of the Democrat base that is, I guess, pro-Palestine and anti-Israel than in the converse in the Republican Party. So I think in some ways, that might be the main reason why he made it in. As far as he's always, I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt for the first 4 years, the 5D chess thing and all that. And it's like, I a lot of people that, I respect, they're close with and stuff, and gone back and forth on. It's like, I tried to entertain that for the first 4 years. I'm sorry, I don't think I can have that much patience the second time around. He's had 4 years to think about it. Maybe it just has to do with his egomania and maybe he's
certainly seems to be.
And maybe he's not that aware. They say that he doesn't like to read and stuff. So, if you're not going to actually dig into the primary sources yourself, you're going to have to basically go with what people are telling you and who you think you might trust, which is problematic.
And from what I've read, he's incredibly susceptible to flattery. So you look at somebody like Sam Altman, who is, been a typical radical leftist in their general critiques of Trump and white nationalism and all this different stuff. And all of a sudden it's a change of tune. And now he's praising Trump. Larry Ellison's praising Trump, Elon Musk, all these transhumanists. So it seems like they kind of realize that, well, why don't we just join him and just, flatter him with praise, and that he'll kind of do our bidding for us.
Yeah. And, the other thing is that, there's always been, this is the interesting thing about what we call the New Age, right? I mean, it's sort of an umbrella term. It encompasses all kind of stuff like theosophy, Neoplatonism, Gnosticism, Hermeticism, you go on and on, right?
Right.
But it also encompasses like the left and the right. Like there was always like the communist kind of hippie commune New Age people, but there was also the libertarian types, like anti-communist people, like the Ballards that set up the I Am cult up in Mount Shasta. Right. And so that, since we're talking about the New Age movement, conscious evolution, that is sort of an operating system that can be plugged into either a right wing or a left wing sort of political paradigm. And so, whether or not Trump was chosen to be the face of that, or whether or not that crowd of sort of libertarian, futurist New Agers thought that, they could co-opt that movement, that appears to be sort of the Musks and the Thiels and people like that. I think you did a stream recently looking at Thiel's speech or his interview at the Hoover Institute, where he's pretty much talking about eschatology and suggesting that, just like Barbara Marx Hubbard, look, we don't, basically she says like the book of Revelation doesn't have to happen. We can all get together and make peace ourselves, right? We can, through our human potential. So that milieu is definitely behind him. And they're definitely, he's going to put Musk in charge of Doge. He's got, Vance is, basically the sort of a Thiel.
Exactly. And that's what I thinking about, just that framing that I laid out before you, is like, if JD Vance is the successor to Trump, which is, it seems to be, at least for all intents and purposes right now, it seems to be the plan, is that he's setting up for essentially a JD Vance presidency after him. Well, he's a Peter Thiel acolyte, and I could totally see, and even Father Spirit and Bailey tweeted or posted on X yesterday regarding all this stuff, that the digital IDs are going to come with Vance, and that the system for it is going to be built right now for the next 4 years under Trump. And then when Vance takes place, he was kind of warning some of the Orthodox faithful, well, it's all going to be put in place under Vance, because he essentially is one of these, I don't know if he's explicitly transhumanist, but he certainly has these sympathies towards the technocratic elites, visions for the future.
Yeah. And here's the thing, there's a lot of explicit New Age folk kind of been hovering around Trump for a while. You know, I mean, he himself said that Norman Vincent Peale was like his go-to priest, basically, right? Norman Vincent Peale is like one of these, positive thinking, not Orthodox Christian. Okay.
No, it's your typical New Age law of attraction stuff.
Yeah. HMP or human potential, all that type of stuff wrapped up into sort of an NGO that looks like a church. And then he had Michael Flynn's been really a big supporter of him. And I don't know if you've ever seen the clip of Michael Flynn doing the it's almost verbatim. I don't want to get in trouble like the Wes Huff, but this is actually almost verbatim. It's like maybe a couple words off where he's doing the St. Michael prayer, right? And if there's clips of Elizabeth Clare Prophet, who basically took over sort of the I Am cult from the Ballards and kind of spun it off into her own thing. It's basically the same thing. And if you've ever been, like I've been to them, there's a lot of nice people there. I'm not saying all that, like good people. I enjoyed myself there. I liked a lot of people, but it's a lot of New Age stuff, a lot of dispensational stuff, and a lot of those reawakened tours, So there's that, the Bannon crowd behind him. Bannon was into Gurdjieff back in the day. I mean, they say he's not into it anymore, but into Rene Guénon and stuff like that. So right. I know these aren't Trump. These are the people behind him. Although, again, he's has affinities for Norman Vincent Peale. All of that.
Well, I will say about Bannon is at least publicly, he's endorsed a sort of trad Catholic position. He's got Orthodox icons before. What is the show or the name? He's War like America. Room. I forget it. It's one of these sub networks like Newsmax and OAN and something like that. I forget what it's exactly called. Charlie Kirk has his own show on there, and Bannon's been one that's been very outspoken against transhumanism. So that's something that he speaks to quite often, and then the sort of technocratic global elite, and very, very critical of Vivek and Elon regarding the H-1B. So it's interesting that, to some degree, again, we don't know the sincerity of Bannon or anybody like that, but there is an interesting milieu of people around Trump trying to grab his ear.
Yeah, and look, I spoke at an event where Bannon was the keynote. I consider Joe Allen a friend. I mean, I think he considers me a friend. I haven't spoken to him in a while. That's he's on War Room. Like I don't mean to disparage anybody, but I'm just saying that it's worth keeping an eye on, right? It's not just one or two people, right? Like that thing is around him. So what I'm getting at is, if we're going to still give Trump the benefit of the doubt this time around, and we're going to assume that maybe he's not aware of all the stuff around him, or maybe not savvy enough, or maybe he's too easily swayed by his ego and flattery, then I think a lot of the attention needs to be around the people around him more than him, because it seems like even, civil discourse around Trump sort of kind of ends up in this type of conversation, right? Where it's hard to pin down, but I think some of the people around him are easier to pin down. And that's going to give you a heads up on any ways that the Trump administration is going to go wayward.
Right. Yeah. Well, let's get into a little bit of your article. I guess before we go through this specific one, do you want to contextualize this third piece? Because I'm actually really excited for the fourth piece on this. You're going to connect Barbara Marx Hubbard with the human potential movement, something that I used to be a very big fan of Esalen back in my New Age days, previous life, if you will. And so you're going to connect her with kind of that Esalen human potential movement in the fourth article. Before we move to this particular third article, you want to contextualize, you already kind of talked about the general project that you're working on in the research and people asking you to dive a little bit deeper into this. But before we move through, is there anything that you want to contextualize for the audience?
No, I think I laid out the decent amount of context. The human potential stuff, I'll say though, I actually dug into that relatively thoroughly in the first piece. The second one, the connections to the human potential movement, the last one is the creepiest one of all because it involves her connections to people like Nancy Salzman of Nexium, the
Mm.
Finders cult. And
Oh.
it's through Nexium that I'm making the human potential connection as far as the next article.
Okay. I didn't pick that up in the end point of the third article. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, and also at something called the Manitou Foundation, which has a New Age community called Crestone. It's out in Colorado. It was set up by Maurice Strong, funded by Lawrence Rockefeller. It has a lot of people that, you know, how the New Age communes and some of the New Age, let's just call them cults, end up having weird sexual scandals. Well,
tends to be the theme.
A lot of those people end up at Crestone. Okay. And apparently there's a book. It was written by a friend of Charlotte Iserbeat's. Name is Christine Chandler. She spoke. I'm going by her reporting, right? It's it's essentially an anecdotal report. It's her memoir. She experienced a lot of strange stuff with the Tibetan, the lamas, and the Dalai Lama in particular. Your audience might recall a year or two ago the instance where he asked the young boy to suck his tongue. Like it goes in that direction. So Hubbard is somehow tangentially connected to all of that stuff as well.
Wow.
So that's the darkest and the creepiest. If you can get any darker than culling 1/4 of the human population, I think that's the way you do it.
Yeah, I'd say so. And I want to share this link with the chat. So if you guys want to read this as well as his previous articles on the topic, and keep an eye out for the 4th installment, you can do so at that link right there at unlimitedhangout.com. But to begin here, and I'd like to, maybe you can kind of summarize. I don't want to read it for the audience, but I would like to read some of these major block quotes you have, because every one of these is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
And so this first one, you're kind of talking a little bit about you're able to get your hands on a document. It was that was speculated to exist or not, and you showed that at the beginning there. And in it, there was a speculation or a rumor of a potential quote that you then actually found definitively in the piece, correct?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so I want to read this block quote, and it says, out of the full spectrum of human personality, 1/4 is elected to transcend. 1/4 is destructive. They are defective seeds. In the past, they were permitted to die a natural cause. Now, as we approach the quantum shift from the creature human to the co-creative human, rhetoric you often see out of these transhumanists, the human is an inheritor of godlike powers. Aha. So the apotheosis that, again, I always talk about, the destructive 1/4 must be eliminated from the social body. Unfortunately, you are not responsible for this act. We are. We are in charge of God's selection process for the planet Earth. He selects, we destroy. We are the riders of the pale horse, death. And just for anybody that wants the biblical reference to that, I pulled that up, Revelation 6:8, which he's referring to. And it says, and I look and behold a pale horse, and his name that sat on him was death, and hell followed with him, and power was given unto them over the 4th part of the earth, to kill with sword, and with hunger, and with death, and with the beasts of the earth. So you want to comment a little bit on this?
Yeah, it was really difficult to find. It took me, so the second article in the series, I hadn't found it yet. And it was interesting. I had ended up debating some of her colleagues, who I guess got the first piece. It was more of a dialogue. I was very nice. I was very polite. But I mean, we were, I was rebutting the arguments they were putting forth. And from that, I ended up, because like I said, I was respectful and we got along and stuff. So one of the ladies was kind enough to, she had gone hiking and happened to come across, I won't name anybody. I've asked some of them, like, hey, can I share this so I can credit you? And they'd rather not. So, because some of them aren't in the public. But so she was hiking with somebody, and this other person said she talked about the episode we'd had, and this other person said, "Oh yeah, that's a legit manuscript." He says, "I know where it was somebody that used to work for Stan Monteith. Stan Monteith, was it at Radio Liberty? I think, I can't remember. I think that was the organization, but it was his radio show. And so she was like, well, hey, would you like to talk to that guy? I said, of course. So I got in contact with this other individual and gave him a phone call, and he said, yeah. I says, well, where did Stan get it? He said he got it from what's her name? Constance Cumby. Right. So Constance Cumby wrote the book, The Hidden Dangers of the Rainbow. There it is. There's an image of it right there. The Coming Age of Barbarism. It's essentially looking at a lot of it actually focuses on the New Age ploy to basically stage a false messiah. She confronted a guy that was they were planning. They were saying he was gonna that the Christ was going to emerge sometime in the 80s. One of these guys was Benjamin Krem, and she went and confronted him, debated him, and things. And obviously they never popped up. But she was the one that had it. So he says, I can put you in contact with her. So he gives me her email. So I get her email. Then I get her phone number. And she says, yeah, I have she sent me a digital copy. But, as the way internet goes, plus I wanted to interview her because I wanted to get her backstory and how she got the manuscript and all that. So I went out there and came up with this. And basically what she said was that Hubbard had these and she would sell them. She has a few copies of them, right? If you look at the one that's linked, it doesn't look like this. It's like a pink paper. Then she gave me this one. And then there was another physical one at the house. It's funny because I got there. The woman has like a 10,000 book library in the basement.
Wow.
Okay. Now, if you see what's behind me, that's almost so. When Charlotte Imserbeat passed away, she gave me all her library and all her files, all her papers. So I have lobster crates that are probably almost to the ceiling, filled with just papers, file cabinets. She had 13 file cabinets. There's like 36 drawers full of them. Okay. And
wow.
Gave me all of that. But all these books are about 99% of them are hers. And there's more in the other room, but this is close to like 70% of them. All right. So she gave me about 1,000. All right. So I'm saying that so you can get it for 10,000. It's like,
right.
Ginormous library. Every and shelves in between shelves, and I'm like, where can you? She's like, I haven't seen that in forever. I'm like, oh, I got one day to get this interview. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to find this. So the first thing I looked was in the file cabinets, and I go back and luckily enough, one of the first ones I opened up had a bunch of Hubbard books in it, and I was like, oh, so I'm looking, I was like, there's no, because it took me, I can't tell you how many hours I put in when I was at Charlotte. I lived there for a whole month at one point during lockdowns.
Wow.
I mean, I literally spent at least 100 hours just because I didn't just grab the file cabinets. Like there was other stuff in there that wasn't necessarily germane to research. It took a lot of time. So I was like, there's no way I'm going to find it. It's kind of neat though, because she was like, whoa, you're good. She's like, I should have you help me organize my stuff. And I'm like, okay. So I've been coming back and like helping her with some of that. And she's actually, she gave me a few things. And so I don't mean to digress too much, but so she went and she got one copy from Rama Vernon and she got another copy from Hubbard herself. I don't know where she got the third one, but out of the two stories, and there's a link, probably right where you're looking in that part of the, yep. So if you click, there's
Rama Vernon.
Yeah, but if you click on where it says interview, if anybody wants to watch the interview with me and her and Courtney Turner, I met her there, and she helped me do it. She's got a lot nicer equipment.
Okay, let me share that link with everybody. Keep going. I'm going to share that so everybody can check it out.
Yeah. So the one was from Rama Vernon. She's the woman that ran the Soviet American exchange dialogue that involved, and this I'll just note this real quick because it kind of ties into what I was suggesting about some of the maybe not true conservative type people in the Trump sphere or around him, and that is Two of the people that were at this Soviet-American dialogue were the people that run what's called the family or the foundation. I think there's a new name again for it. They run the National Prayer Breakfast, right? One is Doug Koch. The other one is a guy by the name of Paul Nathaniel Temple. Paul Nathaniel Temple is also the founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, IONS, is basically this. You're building on Teilhard de Chardin's idea, but they try to give sort of a lot of the ESP type, remote, that type of stuff, a scientific gravitas. Okay, but
and that's been promoted in the Stargate project, the older one with remote viewing and all that stuff with the CIA project. I did a stream with Jay and Sean Ryan on his show. He claims to be a Protestant Christian, but he's been a big promoter of this stuff and having people come on from the CIA claiming to have all these powers.
Yeah, he had John B. Alexander on. Okay, that's First Earth Battalion. Well, guess who else was in First Earth Battalion? Jim Channon. Jim Channon is one of Barbara Marx Hubbard's little buddies. And in the back, it's one of the books I have on her. There's a blurb from him of how she's just the greatest person ever. And so that's, I was going to mention that when you mentioned Stargate. I said the name of that is also
interesting,
right?
Yeah. And I immediately thought of a portal for entities, obviously from my perspective, demons. And even Elon in previous interviews kept talking about how we're conjuring the demon when he was referring to AI. And yet again, that's like that gaslighting. And at the same time, then he's creating companies. So we fuse with the portal of the demons. Like what?
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that panned out, right? I wonder how much of the esoteric kind of remote viewing kind of like, so there's a lot of these new age folk that don't, like you mentioned earlier, right? You're kind of two camps. Some of them that are kind of more into the technology, and that's all good. And then there's some of them that are like really into like nature and being at crystals and meditation and stuff like that. And I wonder how much ground they gained, doing those types of experiments versus did they just go, most of our money and time needs to go into not psychic clairvoyance, but predictive analytics, right? Systems dynamics, right? Et cetera. But the other, I just noted that because it's, this has been a long time that sort of the new age folk have kind of floated around, the evangelical sphere or the Republican sphere. Yeah. But she got the one copy from Ramaver, and she got the other one, went to the house and said that Hubbard came down. I think the daughter or the granddaughter came down, and she says, gave her the check, and Hubbard comes down, and I guess she invited her in. She said she was very nice and made her crepes, said the crepes were very good. And she said she'd promised not to, I'm going to take that out of print. And, you're right. That's, so the reason why she has multiple copies is, as far as I understood it, was she was going around to see if she stopped printing it, and she didn't. One of the first times, and she'd go around and find another one. Okay. So she also told some interesting stories where you and your audience might be familiar with Marilyn Ferguson and the Aquarian Conspiracy. It was one of the seminal New Age texts. Yep. And Constance had met. I think she said, it's in the interview, you can double check, that Ferguson, her lawyer, Constance is a lawyer, by the way. So, she could defend herself when they threatened her with these, cease and desist. You're saying things about, she's like, I am not saying anything that I can't document, and I don't have to pay any money to defend myself. Bring it on, basically. And, they backed off. But at one point she invited her out. New Agers are interesting like that. I mean, I think a lot of them, is the way Constance says it is, there's the deluders and the deluded. Right. There's the people that kind of know there's the Luciferian bent, right, and all that, and the technocracy. There's other people that are very well meaning and don't quite see that far down where the path goes. And so they're very friendly, but it's hard to tell. They're all very friendly. It's hard to tell which ones are being friendly because they're trying to get information from you or maybe influence you versus the ones that are just, genuinely nice. Well, Ferguson invites her over there, and at this party, she says there was Timothy Leary was there. And,
interesting.
So she rubbed elbows with a lot of these
pretty influential people.
Yeah. So that's kind of the backstory on that document. A lot of people credit this to there's an actual book called there's two versions of it. One is The Revelation or Crisis is a Birth, and then it has like a third subtitle, The Book of Co-Creation. And then there's another one that's titled similarly, but there are passages in there that are very close to this. And I had thought that maybe what she did was she toned this down, and sort of reworked it for the actual publications that were financed or were backed by Lawrence Rockefeller and the Foundation for Conscious Evolution. If you keyword search in there, you'll see that she uses the word transhuman explicitly several times. I mean, not that you need to, but it's just, and this is, I think, what does it say? 1980-ish, early 80s. This manuscript is 80. That one might be.
This one says 83. Yeah.
Okay. So the one I got here is 3 years earlier. Okay. But it's just interesting. And she even connects it to like Christ consciousness, that Christ consciousness is transhuman. Like she pretty much says that explicitly. Right?
And that makes sense. Again, this emphasis on IQ and intelligence is sort of a secular bridge into this sort of Gnostic paradigm of, gnosis elevating and liberating us from historical constraints. In this case, typically they frame it as the biological constraints of material evolution, and that we're moving towards the realm of perfection, some type of Gnostic idealism, if you will.
Well, isn't it basically just what the serpent says in the garden?
Exactly.
Right?
Well, in your article, and you made the point where they venerate Eve, which is it. And I wrote this down as I said, one of my points on the articles was Gnostic veneration of Eve. A theme that I see over and over again is, we as Orthodox Christians have a very different interpretation of the fall, and that Gnostics throughout, even the ancient cults, the various Gnostic cults, all viewed, there it is. And I'm right here on an iMac, right? So
with the bite, the Apple with the bite. Yes,
exactly.
Right?
All my mirrors, my computer, my cell phone, my laptop, it's all indicative of that same ethos of sort of recasting Eve's transgression against God's will as a sort of feminist, liberative becoming of divine knowledge, this Gnostic bent.
Yeah, and that's why I tried to sort of rebut some of the New Agers that were like, they were trying to say that Barbara Marx Hubbard, was well-meaning and all this stuff, and that they're not into transhumans, they're more into the crystals and the natural stuff, right? But Hubbard was not, and I it's funny because I was quoting, like I'm reading the quotes, and they would just like gish gallop to the next thing. So, and I didn't hammer it down. I just let it go. I mean, the audience can see that they.
But that paradigm, I mean, to your point, even though there are these sort of distinctive camps within the New Age, the paradigm itself is they're not going to say no to it. Ultimately when it comes, although maybe you have a different opinion. I'd like to hear your thoughts on that, because I did see that some of the New Age and more of the holistic people, they were reluctant in regards to the left wing when 2020 took place and 2021 when they rolled out the jabs. There was a kind of considerable slice of the New Age holistic movement that was against all that. So what are your thoughts on because generally speaking, I think New Age spirituality and perennialism and their sort of general ethos is that they are going to move towards the transhumanist movement, whether they're technology enthusiasts or not. The whole idea of like personal illumination by means of knowledge and experience and your own sort of ecstatic emotive states. I mean, they're going to be able to give you that through technology. But what are your thoughts on that sort of hesitancy by some in the New Age regarding the beginning of a sort of genetic manipulation?
Well, there's a few things I can think of. In Brave New World, written by Aldous Huxley, Julian Huxley's brother.
Mm-hmm.
So a friend of mine, I got the note here. A friend of mine said that, and y'all can check this out. This is just a Lisa Logan sent me this. She's a good researcher. So
yeah.
I trust that this is accurate, but I haven't looked at the primary source. But she says that there's something called the Happy Valley Foundation. I don't know where it's at. I think it's in California, but it's now called the Ojai Foundation, OJAI Foundation. The original Happy Valley Foundation was funded by money from Annie Besant, a theosophist. And Aldous Huxley did some stuff there. Okay. And the reason I touch on that is because if you ever read chapter 4 or 5 of Brave New World, where they do what they call orgy porgy, the solidarity service, it's the satanic inversion of the liturgy and the Eucharist, where they take soma and have an orgy and they connect with the greater being, and then they were into that. I think he has a book, The Perennial Philosophy, right? The Doors of Perception. Like it's so, but in that book, Brave New World, and I also have, if you look back there, that one set of the different colored books on the middle shelf, that's all his nonfiction essays. If you read his nonfiction essays, the man was explicitly pro-eugenics, pro-Malthusian. The way he writes in this like Rogerian style, where it's like he looks at both sides and kind of weighs them until by the end of it, it's kind of this middle ground that kind of leans toward the bad thing anyways, because it's like, well, it's like a false dichotomy, and he kind of whittles you down to like, okay, I guess we have to, right?
Yeah, the inevitability of the alternative.
Yeah, and in Brave New World, he said there was 2 people that resisted before the 9 Years War and the Great Economic Collapse was what was before the new, what they call the Age of Ford. And the people that they had to get rid of were the Christians, and the other ones were, they said, the simple lifers. That might be the new age people that don't figure out that, like, hey, either get on board with the transhuman thing or you're in the same boat as the Christians and anybody else that doesn't want to get along. Now, the other thing is that I'm hoping that like a lot of those people will, as they go down the path and see that, it ends somewhere that they didn't intend, that they jump off that path, maybe find a home in orthodoxy. But my thing is that, to your point, and this is what I tried to argue, is that, so they're not transhumanists and they're not eugenicists, meaning they're not biological determinists and they're not technological determinists. But if you're a conscious evolutionary, right, what is the main basis for different ways that they want to self-actualize, achieve their human potential that are not technological? Mindfulness, meditation, psychedelics, asceticism, a sweat lodge, right? Different ways to sort of get that ecstatic or altered state.
Social communes, collective living.
And they always refer to it as vibes or vibrations, right?
Yes.
So in other words, your consciousness, right? Because when you get into your your meditative state, right? And they've done studies on this, the different brain waves that are produced in the different states of consciousness. So they're all about vibrations, right? Well, the place where conscious evolution and the spiritual vibration stuff dovetails with the transhumanism is that what I said was, so sometimes you do your meditation and you use a meditation bell. Ding, and that's supposed to help you kind of tune in and get your brain waves and your heart rate. Right. Well, what's the difference? I mean, that's a technology, isn't it? It's a tool, isn't it? Well, so what's the difference between that and a heart math wearable or an EEG monitor, right? It's just helping you get your breathing in line. So the goal is to get your vibrations in a place where your consciousness is like evolving or ascending. If you can do that literally with an electrical signal through a wearable or an implantable, what's the difference? Right. In other words, a vibrational determinacy dovetails with the technological determinacy. And if you don't realize that, like you said, you're either just going to walk into it and just slowly get acclimated to it, or at some point you're going to have to go, I need to get off this boat. Right. So,
Well, and the people that got off that boat, it's interesting that many of them were surprised that these sort of conservative Christians, and not any one particular denomination, but that they were the only ones else resisting. And it brought some of those new age people, at least some of the women I saw, it was shared on Instagram or something, that some of these women have sort of come to Christ And 2020 was a sort of eye-opening experience where that was one of the only groups that were sharing their same sentiments. Meanwhile, they were sort of castigated by their new age community.
Yeah, I mean, and you know, that's all good. Those are all good signs, and those are good trends. I mean, there's also been at the same time, sort of this, you know, I don't want to, again, I don't want to disparage people. I can't see into their hearts, but somebody like a Russell Brand and the Christ consciousness.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? So it's like, so you have also
sure.
a lot of people converting to Christianity, but not, right? Like just basically watering down people that are actually thinking and trying to pull them back into the fold with this Christian.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
Well, moving on then in your article, so you kind of introduce Constance Cumby and you getting access into some of these quotes and talking about the relationship or that you're going to go into. You're kind of doing a quick overview here at the beginning about Barbara Hubbard's relationship to Jonas Salk, which is going to be very interesting. And as you mentioned, the beloved benefactor, Lawrence Rockefeller, and all that Rockefeller money behind this sort of Malthusian transhumanist agenda. And so the next section of the article really gets into baptism by Teilhard de Chardin's Malthusian eugenic crisis of noetic birth. And we've already kind of hit on that, but I'm going to read this quote, and then maybe you can dive into more, particularly regarding this section or anything that we haven't covered yet. But you're quoting here de Chardin, and he says, Earth's population began to shoot up in an alarming fashion. Now we suddenly see the saturation point ahead of us and approaching at a dizzying speed. How are we to prevent this compression of mankind on the closed surface of the planet from passing that critical point beyond which any increase in numbers will mean famine and suffocation? Above all, how are we to assure that the maximum population, when it is reached, shall be composed only of elements harmonious in themselves and blended as harmoniously as possible together? Individual eugenics, breeding, and education designed for the purpose only the best individual types, and racial eugenics, the grouping of intermixing and different ethnic types being not left to chance, but effected as a controlled process in the proportions most beneficial to humanity as a whole, both, as I well know, come up against apparently insuperable difficulties from the point of view of technical organization and from that of psychological resistance. But this does not alter the fact that the problem of building a healthy mankind already stares us in the face and is growing more acute every day.
It's funny listening to you read stuff like after I've read something 100 times and written it, and then listen, and then like other connections. I won't digress, but yeah, that the key here is that throughout his literature, and she picks up on this. It's this idea of crisis, this environmental crisis is going to be this inflection point. You can also see in there too, right, where he's talking about the difference between individual and racial eugenics. I mean, I think that's a nice paraphrase of what I was trying to get at when I was using that bell curve analogy of kind of how people like de Chardin and Julian Huxley viewed eugenics. It's certainly post World War II for sure. But that's sort of the idea here, is that, right, these crises are these inflection points that sort of trigger us to come up with some sort of evolutionary scheme, right? And so whether that be eugenics or moving into the future transhumanism, de Chardin also used the phrase ultra-human a few times in his writing, so whereas buddy Julian, and they were very friendly with each other. They said a lot of nice things about each other. And if my memory serves me correctly, it was in O'Fallon's presentation, the same one that had the noosphere graphic. I hate trying to go off memory sometimes on the public record, because just in case I get something slightly inaccurate, but you could see his presentation at the Cognitive Liberty Fest that you can get at Cordy Turner's website if I'm slightly off here. But basically there was a quote in there where Julian Huxley, it's not just saying nice things about, like, he was agreeing with de Chardin in terms of the noosphere, like theoretically, right? Like, so, so that's kind of, and you'll see the rest of the block quotes here are pretty much more of the same, with more of his idea that, there's limited resources, we're overproducing, overconsuming, and that, there's no choice. There is the crisis of birth. And if you look at something like this. Oops. Hubbard's. This is one of the books that it says our crisis is a birth. This is one of the books that people were saying, oh, it's from this book. And I'm like, it's not in this book, right? But it actually, the passages that I thought were rephrased from that infamous quote were not. Those passages are actually verbatim in this original manuscript. So this is actually like an edited version of the thing that had the culling of the population. Right? But right in the title is this sort of this idea that she got from de Chardin, right? That these crises are the things that drive evolution, basically. Right.
And for anybody not aware, I mean, I've talked about de Chardin quite a bit on this channel regarding transhumanism, but he was a Jesuit. And for those of you who don't know, Pope Frank, as I call him, Pope Francis is the first Jesuit pope. And the Jesuits have had a very interesting history. I was thinking about doing maybe an overview stream on some of the quote unquote conspiracies regarding the Jesuits. But de Chardin was also connected with the Piltdown Man hoax regarding sort of proving of macroevolution, which, at least from my reading, I have yet to see definitive proof of macroevolution, Darwin's major theory. Natural like speciation. Yes, I think there's proof that the environmental conditions can change phenotypes regarding species, but regards to macroevolution, there is not. And de Chardin claimed that he found this Piltdown Man over in China, proving evolution, which turned out to be a major hoax. And there's considerable evidence that he knew that it wasn't authentic in the first place. But along with, the Huxleys and some of these major, these major transhumanist evolutionary figures, they tried to pass it off as proof of macroevolution. So if you guys weren't aware of that, that's just a little bit of some contextualization of who this guy was and what kind of his overall goal was.
Yeah. And, to your point, one of the things that kind of make me think of is that, with people like de Chardin and people like Hubbard, they're doing sort of two things in sort of recursive directions. So one is like, lending scientific credence to mysticism in the occult, and then spiritualizing the sort of the brute materialism of science and technology.
Right.
And so what that does is it's interesting because it actually enables people, the new age, to bring in people from various ideologies and backgrounds, from the atheist to the agnostic to the theistic, right? And you mentioned the human potential movement. I mean, in the first piece, I talked about, I wrote about, Abraham Maslow, the founder of humanistic psychology, which basically is the crux of the human potential movement. This was one of Hubbard's mentors. Okay. Basically his idea of humanistic psychology, he called the third force of psychology. So the first two forces were the behaviorist school and then the psychoanalytic school. So basically one school is that all your psychology is just neural conditioned reflex responses to the environment. The Freudian psychoanalytic school is that, the main crux of your psychology has to do with subconscious stuff, usually triggered from some kind of trauma. Both of them largely focused on pathologies. So, right, if there's something psychologically wrong with you, it's either because it was bad conditioning or you have some kind of subconscious trauma. And so those two schools focus largely on pathologizing and sort of corrective measures as opposed to proactive measures. So his idea was that, well, you can't just be constantly reactionary to the mind. You have to move towards something, that you have to self-actualize. He called this third force positive or humanistic psychology. And this is where the human potential movement comes out of. But I should note that he actually said that was going to lead to what they call a fourth force of psychology, that in his book called Psychology of Being, he refers to it as, quote, transpersonal and transhuman psychology. Okay, but the reason I'm mentioning this is that the human potential movement is one of these things where We talked about ways that the New Agers want to achieve ascended consciousness through mindfulness, meditation, psychedelics, or positive thinking, manifesting vision boards, all the stuff, mandalas. You can do that from sort of you can either imbue that with some sort of metaphysic or some sort of esoteric, right? Actual spiritual channeling or something like that. Or you can just approach it like they're just archetypes of the psyche, right? Sort of in a Jungian sense. Right. But they're the same techniques. And something like that enables you to basically participate in the New Age modalities with or without believing in the pleroma and the noosphere, etc.
Right. Yeah, it's a sort of sanitized. Yeah, I call it a techno-Gnosticism. It's sort of sanitized with secular terms. And reading your article and just regarding all this literature and things that you said regarding some of these new age technologies for mindful illumination and all this different stuff, is that it all leads towards, and one of the main, I would say, paradigmatic differences with Christianity, or more specifically Orthodoxy, is this emphasis and importance of personhood and the individual person. And that whether it be you getting brain chips, whether it be Christ consciousness, that it has to do with sort of an elevation beyond your own personal identity into something collective, something where they're selling you on a sort of advancement of identity and potentially cognitive abilities or general abilities through disassociating yourself with your individual identity to this abstract collectiveness. And this is where the communes and the socialism or whatever it may be, it's all sort of pushing them in that same general direction, which is a sort of inversion of what communion actually is. Communion has to be, from our perspective, voluntary through the intention and the will of the individual wanting to communicate, build community with people based on the right reasons. And when people, once the Neuralink's in your brain, once it's attached to, who knows, this project Stargate that the US is building, you really don't have true individuality, because your thoughts, your emotions, your sensations, these all can be controlled without your knowledge. And you're essentially part of a collective hive mind, which gets back to this omega point and the singularity, generally speaking. It's all moving back. When you look at it paradigmatically, it's moving back to these same patterns over and over.
Yeah, transhumanism, sometimes there's another phrase, it's called posthumanism. Now, different schools of thought quibble about whether those things mean two different things. Some people say they're basically synonymous. Other people say that transhumanism maybe is more of a transitional stage in which, right, you've got wearables and maybe a chip here or there. Right. But posthumanism is something where we've so fully integrated with AI and digital technologies that the new creature is almost indistinguishable from the original human being. Well, there's only one other way that we use the term post-human, and that's when we say posthumous, right? Posthumous, right? It means dead.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
So it's like,
that's a great point.
And go back to the garden again, right? The serpent says, oh, if you eat this, you'll be like God, you'll be like him. First he says, Eve says, no, we can't do that because then we'll die. He says, no, you'll become like God, you'll be like him. I mean, sort of that dichotomy. I mean, this is sort of that paradigm is sort of reflected in the pursuit of transhumanism leading to posthumanism, right? Like, in other words, the more you enhance and augment your consciousness by interfacing with this AI, right, the less you are human, to the point in which essentially you haven't just integrated and augmented you have essentially replaced it. Right. Like, and so, in other words, you have annihilated yourself. Right. So, in other words, the quest to become your own God through knowledge and technology leads to death. Right.
Right.
Right. And that's, and so there, it's sort of like,
it's literally the recapitulation of the fall. It's just, done in a modern guise. And, I just lost my thought. We're speaking about, the posthumanism is that, I love that point that you said about posthumously connecting it, because at least within the academic fields of like the posthuman disciplines, there's a tension between the transhumanists who consider themselves a sort of frontier of the humanist project through technological means. And then you have these radical environmentalists and these are academics, PhDs, working at universities, publishing articles that are in favor of, again, the title of your article, Malthusianism, literally the killing off of a vast majority of the human population to save the planet. And so both of them, as you said, it's posthumous death of the individual, whether it be through the technological annihilation of your individual person, or the other school of posthumanism, which is really just like, we have to kill you guys. We have to get rid of the majority of the people on the planet.
Yeah. So, I mean, in one way or another, however you slice it, it's essentially nihilism, right? Your conscious evolution, your enlightenment is nihilism, right?
And as you bring up, and we'll get to it in the article, this sustainable development and this rhetoric of sort of saving the ecological world from our own destruction of it, both of it leads to the post-human future. Yeah. And so it's like, you can get this. So whether it be the WEF, they may, step back, after Yuval Noah Harari's Homo Deus on the explicit transhumanist rhetoric and just talk about the preservation of nature and global climate change and all. Well, it's the same damn movement. It's just rhetoric from two sides of the aisle.
Yeah. And, not to digress too much, but, there's some other interesting parallels between this concept of like gnosis and conscious evolution and sort of the tree of knowledge or the fruit of knowledge and evolution and all this. If you've ever taken a look at the Masonic square and compass, right? It's got a G in the middle of it, right?
Yep.
The G stands for, right, a few different things, but some of the things that it stands for is, right, geometry, gnosis, God. Okay. And what you have there is sort of the square and compass, right? So that's basically, with the square and compass, you can make any curved line, you can make any angled line, right? So you can essentially make all geometrical shapes with those two instruments. Okay. It's through geometry that we master architecture and engineering, obviously. Right. But you can also abstract it in terms of, right, think about what I was talking about in terms of moving population dynamics, group dynamics, systems dynamics on sort of a 3D AI buckyball grid. Right. Yeah. Or think of something like allotropy, if you know what that is. Right. Allotropy is basically it's how your it's how your metabolism works. It's like a lock and key kind of thing. It literally has to do with the geometric shape of the molecules. And it's like when they come together, it'll release the chemical that you need, sugar, ATP, whatever, right? And so it's literally like even if you're looking at abstract graphs of like brain waves, I mean, it's coming out, right? It's coming out. We graph everything in the abstract, if not just a numerically on a spreadsheet, we graph things geometrically. So even in the abstract. So in other words, through geometry, right? Through geometry, you can achieve gnosis. And by achieving gnosis, you can become your own God, right? And so, in other words, right, it's the same concept, right? It's that the pursuit of knowledge through science and technology will evolve your consciousness into some enlightened state, and then you will be your own God if you don't annihilate yourself.
Right. And, the Masonry explicitly worships the great architect, which can be Jewish, the Jewish God, Allah of Islam, Christianity. It's this perennial worldview. And so it's often referred to as the great being, which gets back to something that you mentioned earlier, is about the unification with the abstractness of it all, unification with the great being itself. That's literally what Masonry worships. And we can literally see that rhetoric playing out in all fields, including, de Chardin's noosphere rhetoric. So let me read this next block quote. So this comes from Human Energy, and Teilhard de Chardin writes, "Too much iron, too much wheat, too many automobiles, and even too many children." Oh, I've heard that before. We must ask what this excess production means. Is the world condemned as it grows to automatic death by stifling beneath its own excessive weight? Not at all. We would answer, it is in course of gathering to itself a new higher body, At this crisis of birth, everything depends on the prompt emergence of a soul, which by merely appearing will come to organize, lighten, and vitalize this mass of stagnant and confused matter. The resource at our disposal today, the powers that we have released, could not possibly be absorbed by the narrow system of individual or national units which the architects of the human earth have hitherto used. The age of nations has passed. Now, unless we wish to persist, we must shake off our old prejudices and build the new earth. And I brought up this general rhetoric about, no border, no wall, no USA at all. That, that was a big mantra back during the first Trump administration. But this, the WEF, Agenda 21, I mean, the powers that be have been explicit that we're going to divide the world into regions. And one of the things that I thought was so interesting, that Trump had this rhetoric about buying Greenland and then making Canada the 51st state. And I could understand, I listened to some people, I could understand the geopolitical military reasons for dominant, but if that were to happen, that literally plays right into the plan of dividing the world into 10 regions, which, at least for many Christians and some of the saints, have described as the 10 toes of the beast, and how they're going to reformulate the earth, national identity, ethnic identity, religious identity. It's all going to be amalgamated into this grand blob of 10 regions. And so we can see this exact rhetoric here in de Chardin.
Yeah. And in Brave New World, the one of the major characters is Mustafa Mond. He's one of the 10 world controllers, right? So it's clearly, again, another, tip of the hat at that as well. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? So I saw a video of Bill Cooper talking about the Book of Revelation as the reasons why they use so many numbers or even certain rhetoric. Again, Hubbard's reference to the pale horse is a way to manipulate the Christians into a sort of acquiescence that this is a sort of fulfillment of prophecy and they can't stop it. I've heard other people say, well, these people don't really believe in, the Christian end times or the Antichrist, that they're just playing off the sort of symbolic playbook that Christians believe in, and you kind of instilling fear and all this different stuff. And my point was, whether they believe in it explicitly or not, I think it is a sort of unfolding of God's will and divine prophecy to allow the faithful to see it play itself out before them. What are your general thoughts on that? Whether, the Book of Revelation, how this is used by some of these globalists, where it's almost so explicit, it's like they're using it as their own guidebook.
Well, I definitely think that, look, if you've ever read Mind Wars by Michael Aquino, there's 2 to 3.
He's an overt Satanist.
He's gonna come up in the next piece. By the way, it's sort of a tangent, but it's related. But anyways, there's just a 3-volume series: Mind War, Mind Star, and Find Far. But if you read Mind Wars, basically one of the things he talks about is having trusted people that can manipulate the mores and taboos and things of various cultures and populations for the sake of sort of pushing them towards what he calls the Aristos, right? I mean, it's his term for sort of the equilibrium state where everybody's kind of going along with the agenda. So very useful to that is obviously then what he's saying is that if you're running psychological operations, fundamentally, one of the main things you want to play with is people's deepest beliefs, right? Their deepest affinities. Religion's one of them, right? And so definitely, that's definite. I could definitely see that they would play with the tropes in the Book of Revelation, knowing that it will get a very emotional response out of a lot of people. You can even, it could be fear, but it could also be like, it could motivate people to fight the New World Order, so to speak, right? And you could flip it on its head. I mean, which might be the thing you kind of are
in that dialectic. I mean, that's kind of what I was hinting at with this Trump, Ellison, Musk, Altman type phenomenon is that, you know, they played that dialectic. And so Trump's going to rescue us from the New World Order, right? That some of these people believe. And at the same time, he's literally giving, you know, creating the financial engine to build it.
Yeah. Yeah. And, you know, and if so, look, Trump is the hero. He's winning. And, you know, I think you've talked about it on your show, but I know that you're aware of some of the plans to rebuild the third temple.
Yep.
You know, he put his face on the back of that coin with Cyrus, right?
Yep.
They've got the Prince of Peace award. Like, there's a lot of creepy sort of messianic tropes around the guy.
His replica of the Ark of the Covenant
Yes.
in Mar-a-Lago.
Yes. And then you have like sort of the evangelicals that are on board that like also think it's funny because like, so, you know, in Israel, right, sort of the people, the Orthodox or the, you know, the Jewish people that want to, you know, rebuild the third temple, they think they see it as, right, the Messiah is finally going to arrive for the first time. Right. But the evangelicals that are like on Team Israel, they think that they rebuild the third temple, that then first it'll be the Antichrist will come up, but then Jesus will come back. So it's like both of them are kind of like on board with this, like sort of a, I mean, for lack of a better term, kind of like a crusade, and it's kind of being driven by the idea that they're, you know, sort of fighting the globalists and the New World Order and all this type of stuff. So what you have is, you know, as you mentioned, these people playing with these tropes about the Book of Revelation and the end times. You're playing with people's religious sentiments. Do the people that are maybe manipulating those actually believe in that, like biblically, like scripturally? I don't think so. And I don't know that they it's funny that they're going to use it as a playbook to sort of flip it on its head. But as you know, like it's kind of like they're also trying to at least you know, in the evangelical and sort of the ziosphere, that they're kind of trying to force God's hand. Like, we're gonna make Revelation happen. We're gonna bring Jesus back. We're gonna bring
well, and in Talmudic Judaism, I mean, that you can do that, right? So you can sort of force and manipulate for the fulfillment of prophecy. And so I think it's so interesting when you look at somebody like an Elon Musk and understanding of this omega point singularity, or maybe, you know, Ellison is part of that tribe. I don't know what his religious, I would imagine he's probably non-practicing, but then when you're talking about the red heifers and the third temple and the preparations that are already being made in Israel, I mean, a significant swath of the population in Israel is believing in a literal Messiah to come. And I've heard, and dispensationalism is such a mess, but I've even heard some of these dispensationalist evangelicals in America believe that the Messiah that's coming for the Jews is actually the second coming of Christ. And, you know, Orthodoxy is very explicit about how we view all this stuff, and that it is demonic and it is part of the Antichrist spirit. And you look at the Rockefellers and the Balfour Declaration, like, was their intention to fulfill prophecy? I mean, to some degree, it almost feels like it is. I don't know what their religious sentiments are, but the creation of the state of Israel, for the purposes of bringing about it, where, you know, Elon Musk transhumanism, the religious orientation towards the Jewish Messiah, it's all moving towards the same point, which I've speculated that the Antichrist will be some sort of ultimate transhumanist God that will have sort of physical flesh, but he will be transhuman and he will have access to the omnipresent dimensions of the AI system that he's connected to. So it's funny how all these discourses are moving towards the same endpoint, and how so many people, whatever's driving them towards that endpoint, you know, the exploration of Mars or the bringing of their Messiah, it's still a blueprint for the same process.
Yeah. Like, so they're either they don't believe in it at all, and they're using it as they got their own script, but they're using the biblical script to manipulate people to run their own narrative. Or they believe in it, but they're trying to force God's hand to like make it play out the way they want, right? But in either way, in either case, to your point, it's sort of fulfilling the prophecies, right?
Yeah, either way.
If you were going to try to force God to do something, you would be the person, you would be the people that would create the beast system and usher in the Antichrist. And there's one other thing that's interesting is that, you're mentioning like who is the Messiah that will arise after, if and when and after the third temple is built. You've got, well, it'll be Jesus, or it'll be the first Jewish Messiah, or it'll be the second coming of Jesus. Well, in the New Age, it's Maitreya. Or right. It might be who they think is the fifth Buddha and the last Imam Mahdi. And so you got to wonder if really the conflagration that's being set up there is, it's neither of the first two options. It's Maitreya. it's ultimately the New Age thing. But one other thing interesting to note, because so Hubbard is connected to all these institutions that are pushing sustainable development and transhumanism, the fourth industrial revolution, and the Great Reset. The public face of that today is largely the World Economic Forum. This is what we would call a roundtable NGO. The roundtable NGOs go back to the Milner Group, right? And it's out of the Milner Group that you get your first the original roundtables, but then it's your Royal Institute of International Affairs and the Council on Foreign Relations. Then eventually down the line you get Bilderberg, then you get Club of Rome, WEF, Trilateral Commission. These are the same people that set up the CFR, the same people that set up the League of Nations, same people that got the Balfour Declaration set up, like the same people that set up the global governance infrastructure that has basically shaped the world over the last 100 years are the same people that sort of restructured the Middle East to cause that created the scenario that we're in now, whichever side of it you agree or disagree with. It started because of the same Anglo-American establishment that built all the roundtables that are pushing all this full IR stuff. So, maybe a coincidence, but it all moves like the vectors converge.
Yeah, exactly. The intention of the individual doesn't matter. And that's where I had a conversation with an Orthodox Christian. His thing was, well, why should we believe that this is moving us towards the end times? Because they could just be doing this due to symbolic purposes, right? Well, my point was, well, whether they are doing it symbolically, like the 10 regions of the world and the 10 toes of the beast, whether it's just for symbolism or not, I believe through scripture and God's revelation that he's showing us what to look for. So what their intention of doing it is really irrelevant to the fact that these are the things that we have to keep our eyes open towards. And that when they emerge, we actually have a context and a paradigm of understanding to see what we're moving towards. So, so ultimately, whatever their intention is, the forcing of the hand of God or the Maitreya or transhumanism or the Jewish Messiah, it doesn't matter. What we're seeing with, and as you brought into the Middle East situation and the conflicts that have arisen there, this is all planned. I mean, you already know, but the 7 nations that Netanyahu wanted us to destroy, well, we did all of them besides Iran. And what's the rhetoric? Lindsey Graham can't go on a public appearance without talking about how we got to bomb Iran. And so it's whatever their intention is irrelevant. At least for the faithful, we need to have our eyes open, our ears open, and have some type of spiritual discernment to see what's taking place before us.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Next block quote real quick. And then I think you got a few of them. And then we'll move into the next section of your article. This is, again, de Chardin, saying we must shift to renewable, non-polluting sources of energy. Does that sound
Hubbard?
Clear?
Sorry, that's Hubbard. Because I was going to say, well, that's
okay.
Hubbard,
this is Hubbard in the book that you showed, the Revelation, the book of co-creation, which I pulled up right here. Yeah. And here, let me share this link too with anybody out there who wants to get access to this. This is on Archive. So there's the link right there. Yeah. So this block quote is from Barbara Hubbard, and she's saying we must shift to renewable, non-polluting sources of energy. And at least from the copy on Archive, this is 1983. We
think
feel
that
the
one,
pangs of hunger increasing as population escalates and more of us are hungry. All around us, our old life support systems are breaking down. What worked before us has become destructive. We do not have time to change. Yet yet despite our fear and ignorance, we are learning to manage a planetary system. Our crisis is a birth. We are one living system, and we have come to the limit of one phase of natural growth on a finite planet. We may see ourselves as planetary midwives, helping to deliver ourselves as a planetary system toward our next stage of life. And when I first read this, what immediately popped in my mind is this rhetoric totally maps onto Terence McKenna, Timothy Leary, and Robert Anton Wilson. They all talked about the sort of technosphere and evolution. McKenna explicitly, this sort of metaphor as the midwife or these birth pangs. That's what he considered, capitalism and consumerism of the Western world and ecological degradation, that these are signs of a process of birth, where just like a mother goes through pain, that's what we're witnessing. And so when I read this of Hubbard, I thought, wow, I wonder if they pulled from that. Because, McKenna, that's right along that timeline, the 1980s through the 1990s is really when he was doing his Esalen lectures. That rhetoric is exactly what he put forth in his sort of psychedelic spiritual new age worldview.
Yeah, I could see it. Well, and I think just for your audience, I think that's from this book, that quote. They have a similar title, but it's when you go to check either one out, you'll find out. But it might be from that book. But
Okay.
yeah, that's that it wouldn't surprise me that they were aware of her stuff and pull it. They have a very similar titles, so it's easy to mix.
Yeah, my bad on that.
Yeah,
so he's saying that it's from the book Revelation, Our Crisis is a Birth, not Revelation, Alternative to Armageddon, the book that I was showing you on archive. So apologize for that mistake.
No biggie. I just had somebody in the comments section on this most recent article challenge the accuracy of something that I proved was accurate, and then they were polite, and which was a nice change. Most people aren't, but Esalen, so that was part of. So Maslow had something called the Eutychian network, right? So Abraham Maslow, Hubbard's mentor, and this Eutychian network was a network of a lot of human potential organizations, humanistic psychology organizations, etc. But Michael Murphy of Esalen was there as well, and Hubbard had something called the center letter. It was like some little, probably sent it out in a spiral like this, and she printed it and handed it out. And she would have people from the Eutychian network publish articles in there. And I think Murphy specifically.
And for those who don't know, Michael Murphy is the founder of Esalen. It was his family that bought that property. Just FYI.
Right. Yeah, and by the way, we mentioned Huxley's a few times. All this was at Esalen. Maslow was at Esalen. So if these Esalen people are publishing in her letter and they're sharing the letter, then I would, it's not far-fetched to think that they were aware of her. I mean, she got around. Who knows? She might have had personal interactions with them. Yeah,
I wouldn't be surprised.
I know she had Stanislav Grof was. So she was at the State of the World Forum. That was Mikhail Gorbachev. The State of the World Forum was basically another lesser-known roundtable organization that was convened, I want to say late 90s, early 2000s. A lot of emphasis on New Age spirituality, global environmentalism. But a bunch of she attended it. Maurice Strong also attended it. They both were. They were colleagues at the World Future Society, but one of the people at the State of the World Forum was Stanislav Grof, and this was one of I think he's known for kind of making microdosing popular, but I know that he was very much into the health benefits of psychedelics. So, that's getting pretty close to the Leary crowd. So,
Yeah. No, they definitely had overlap over at Esalen. That's for sure.
Yep.
And Stanislav Grof, I mean, that general new age disposition towards psychedelics, rewiring the circuits of neurology and elevating personal individual consciousness. I mean, that correlates right into this. And I mean, literally Barbara's book right here, Conscious Evolution. So easy paradigmatic and philosophical, spiritual connections between these things and some of these people.
Yeah. Well, and
Go
go
ahead.
ahead. Yeah,
No,
go
go
for
ahead.
it. Go for it. I was
You
just,
go
it's
ahead.
kind of a side note, but at Esalen, so in the first piece, I talked about, I looked at something that she promoted. It's called Heart Math. It's a wearable. It's a biofeedback wearable that you put on, monitors your heart. You do a trademarked breathing exercise. It's basically like an MLM company. So you have people that like train other people in how to do the breathing technique with the wearable, and they do these breakout sessions. It's supposed to help you calm your nerves and maybe like become enlightened, achieve your enlightened consciousness, etc. But there was something very similar that they were piloting at Esalen by a guy named Mikey Siegel, and his was called Heart Sync. But his was largely wanted to use it for like group settings. So maybe like at a corporate board meeting, before everybody goes to make decisions about what they want to do with this new project, everybody puts their wearable on and they start doing their breathing meditation. They all get into what they call heart coherence. So they basically all get their wavelengths all on the same bandwidth before they debate things. And it's, if you've ever heard of something called the Delphi technique, it's basically a Rand Corporation methodology for eliciting artificial consensus in group dynamics. So, you can imagine using the Delphi technique in that setting and sort of getting everybody kind of lulled into a sense of complacency so that you're more pliable with whatever they want to ram down your throat.
Yeah. Well, and when you were speaking there, remind me of one of the closing chapter. I think the last 2 or 3 chapters of Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harari talks about these wearables. Dataism is his religious orientation, that all there is data. Therefore, intelligence is defined by algorithms, or the recognition and the processing of data. We are biological algorithms. The AI is a technological algorithm. Intelligence is equal amongst both of them. And he talks in there about these wearables, and that this is the future. And that, thank God, people in these superstitious days believe that God was always with them and knew everything about them. And he says, well, that was all mythology, but moving into the future, we're actually going to have wearables, and the AI will know everything about you. It will know your actual thoughts, because they believe in, this identity theory of brain, so that if they can map what your, the brain waves and what's firing in your neofrontal cortex, they can, like, quote unquote, know your thoughts. So he's like, the AI God of the future, it will know all your thoughts. It'll know every aspect of again, your heartbeat, hormone levels, all this stuff will be documented and monitored. And thank God, because the AI, he'll actually, it will actually be there to save you, unlike these mythologized understandings of God in the past. And he's arguing that those old religions are sort of mimetic devices of evolution, that we are now concretizing these memes and these thoughts of the ancients into the contemporary world. So when you're talking about wearables, I immediately think, totally goes along with the agenda.
Well, with somebody like Harari, I never got all the way through Homo Deus. I read a nice chunk of it. It's back there. But from what I've read and what I've heard, I don't gather the sense that the man has any inclination that there's any kind of metaphysical anything in the universe.
No,
right?
He doesn't.
But if you reduce a human being, the physical creature that I am, to basically data, like, aren't you right? Aren't these like abstractions? Like, I mean, numbers, and right? Like, so you're essentially reducing, you have this materialist biological paradigm, then you reduce the human being to data, you basically end up in a phenomenological world. It's like a world of like a Derridian deconstruction. Right.
Yep.
Where like all there is the text, like the text being the data, right? You are data, right? I mean,
which calls into question how the data is supposed to be interpreted, even to Derrida's credit, right? That's his whole thing in regards to the postmodern turn. But they don't, the AI will figure that out. It will have the correct interpretation. Don't worry about the author behind the text.
Yeah. And the funny thing about that too is, it's going to know everything you think. Like, I've heard Joe Rogan talk about like, oh, one day we'll have a brain chip and you could just read each other's thoughts. It's like, dude, I mean, I don't know. I know Joe thinks a lot, but I don't know. I mean, my specialty is language arts, master's in English. So, language and parsing language and thinking about language at a meta level is something I do quite a bit introspectively as I'm thinking. Like, and dude, there's plenty of times I don't know what I'm thinking. Meaning,
Right.
you're trying to figure it out, or you want to say something, and it's like you kind of have an intuitive sense of what you're getting at, but you haven't found the words yet. Like, if I can't know what I'm trying to articulate, how can there's no way, especially like you said, well, you have signals, brain waves, heart waves, galvanic skin response. Okay, that's just it leads to another layer of interpretation. Like you said, well, that's where the AI comes in, except that I was looking up some stuff on title fundings for the elementary secondary education. And I was trying to see how many title funds there are without reading all the way through the bill, because there's different amendments to it, and you have to look at 5 different bills to actually see how it all fits together. So I type in Title 11 just to see how high the titles go up into Google search engine. And, the Google AI is built in now. So the first thing you get is the Google AI response. Tells me that Title 11 is the thing that governs gender equity and civil rights. That's Title 9. The AI couldn't recognize the difference between an I before an X and an X after an I. Or I'm sorry, an I before an X or an X before an I. And I put it in multiple times and it kept doing it. So if that's its ability to interpret like text, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not too confident that it's gonna have
I'm not
proper
either.
insight into my DNA and my psychology. Yeah.
No. And that's where, just like the Project Stargate, I mean, their response to some of these shortcomings with these LLM models, these language learning models, is it just needs more data. But I read one article about some of these language learning models that actually, at least one in particular, as it took in more data, certain skills that it had at the beginning, like mathematics, actually were degraded over time because it had so much data it couldn't decipher. And so I forget which company it was, but it showed that at the beginning it could do like high quality math computation. And then after it sort of opened it up to the web of all language, it began to unable to compute like mathematical problems that it could in the future. And it's like, well, what are we going to do once this thing's, we're $500 billion into a government controlled AI system? I mean, who knows what it's going to come up with and what its solutions to various problems are going to be, and whether they're consistent with the program that the programmers intended it and sent it on the rail tracks of whatever program it gave it.
Hey man, Silicon Valley says move fast, break stuff, and fix it later. Yeah, all right.
Yeah, they're pretty good at that. Yeah, and then Google says don't be evil.
Well, with the Stargate thing, look, I've said you can go back and go on my website. If you look at the interviews,
what is your website? Let me share that.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's schoolworldorder.info. I've recently cleaned it up and updated it, so I got my conferences on there. It's a little more organized and got more resources on it and stuff. If you go to the interviews section and probably anywhere between 2020 and 2022, you can find multiple interviews where I suggested, and it looks like I was right, that the lockdown situation and the forced mRNA GB jabs was all about getting the foot in the door for something called precision medicine. Precision medicine initiative started under Obama. I believe Fauci had a role in it as well. I can't remember. But basically, it's personalized medicine. It's all medicine that's based on your genetic code, gene therapy, etc. And that's what they're talking about. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about personalizing cancer treatments with mRNA technologies that are essentially going to be gene therapies. The other part of the precision medicine initiative was something called the All of Us Project. It might still exist. They wanted to have so many million people enroll. And what they wanted to do to get more insight into the genetic basis of personalized medicine, precision medicine, was to see how, because genetics it's probabilistic, right? It's not deterministic, right? So if you have the gene for X, Y, or Z, you have a higher proclivity to develop whatever malady is associated with that. But that malady may or may not actually express itself depending on what you do, what you eat, what's in your environment, right? And how do those things trigger those genetic mutations? So they wanted to put one of the guys' names was Eric Dishman, and he got started. He did some experiments with like Alzheimer's patients in smart homes, and so there was all these sensors and stuff, so that to kind of keep them from reminding them to take their medicine and all this type of stuff. But he was on the end of it where basically they wanted to put wearables all over everybody, monitor, Fitbits, etc., monitor all your bio data, monitor your environmental interactions, and then correlate those with the ways in which your genes may deform or start to express pathologies, etc. And so I was listening, Del Bigtree today had Malone on, and Malone was kind of critiquing the Stargate project, but he was critiquing in particular the precision mRNA cancer treatments. He goes, well, that's just like treating that's just more treating the disease. He says, the AI, and then he suggested the AI might not be that accurate, kind of like we did for that. He says what I think would be a better use of it would be to figure out what causes the cancer to start. That's the Dishman project. The only way you're going to do that, and he says that's what the AI would be good for. Well, the only way you're going to figure out how the disease starts in you is to monitor everything you do with your body, everything you put in it, everything you're exposed to, and then over time create some kind of predictive analytic. So what I'm saying is that the Stargate project seems to be the next phase of, they got their foot in the door during lockdowns with the RNA stuff. Now they're going to move forward with the rest of this project under the guise of reforming all the terrible stuff that happened during lockdowns. I do want to mention one other thing related to RNA stuff. So Hubbard in, I think, Happy Birthday Planet Earth, and there's another one, might even be in the Revelation document, but there's at least two documents where I saw her talking about the prospects of what RNA technologies could do for conscious evolution. Right. And Bailey was all about, right. I mean, she was one of the first people to kind of try to tie in physics with mysticism and the occult. She was all about like the mysticism, the magic of the atom. Right. Hubbard's benefactor, Lawrence Rockefeller, he was invested in all sorts of genetic tech. And it was either through Venrock, which is his venture capital firm, or Rockefeller Brothers Fund. I think it's Venrock. You can see it on the first article in the series. There was a company that he financed called Sirna Therapeutics, spelled SIRNA Therapeutics, which specialized in RNA interference technologies. So, right. So, I mean, so that whole RNA, this whole RNA industry, it was been, they were sort of the new agers like Hubbard and her benefactors, her financiers. But she was independently wealthy herself, so she funded a lot of stuff herself. Her dad was Louis Marx of Marx Toys.
She inherited that then. Yeah.
So I mean, but she was bankrolled quite a bit by Lawrence Rockefeller, and he was one of these guys that was basically putting money into what looks like what we got coming down the pipe for Project Stargate. So
well, what you mentioned about Robert Malone is interesting, because I don't know if it's just naivete regarding some of these technologies or just a failure, because I think of the Weinstein brothers and even Robert Malone sort of being part of this sort of liberal progressive ethos. Maybe they feel like it went too far, and then all of them have been very critical of the jabs post 2020, but then aspects of their worldview is still part and parcel related and consistent with the general paradigm that they're antagonistic towards now. So I don't know if it's just a failure to recognize the bigger picture fully, or maybe it's a process where they eventually will. But yeah, if Malone's saying, oh yeah, these mRNAs, you know, they're ineffective, and you know, the variability amongst individuals and how they react to it is too diverse right now to create a, you know, general panacea to various illnesses. But if we just allow the AI to track every single metric of your body, well, that'd be something it's great for. And it's like, well, there's our surveillance system, you know? So yeah, that's not transhumanism, but that's mass surveillance, and gets right back to Larry Ellison and things that he's wanting to put in place.
Well, I'm gonna speculate a little bit. I don't like to speculate on the public record, but I'm gonna speculate a little bit. Don't be surprised if that moving forward, that the Project Stargate and the Maha movement are like they will at least appear to be antagonistic in terms of how they want to reform healthcare. But they will sort of both be moving in the direction of precision medicine. And in that process, you know, think about most of Trump's, you know, well, basically his entire political career for the most part, right? There's always kind of, is it Trump or the deep state? Is it him or the people around him? Is it Trump or Musk? So you'll have sort of two camps where they can push both balls down the field. And, you know, one day it can be Bobby's good and Ellison's bad. Another day, you know, and, you know, he can, both of those things can gain traction in a way where it at least looks like, hey, Bobby's trying to do, but I think Bobby's going to be on board for the personalized, he said it many times. He wants more data. He wants more data to make things more healthy, more safe, more effective, etc. I think that he'll be more on board with sort of the Dishman project of, you know, hey, you can get, we'll give you some health credits if you use this wearable. It'll help us get better data. It'll help us figure out what other types of, you know, dyes and things we can remove. And he could, and, you know, in the meantime, that can be the, you know, the alternative to, you know, just personalized mRNA. Right. But
I can totally see that, because one of the things about lowering health costs that I've seen a few people that are, you know, quote unquote, in the sort of conspiracy red pill world. I saw one guy, I forget his name, but he has a company out of Texas that is dealing with like personalized health, just like what you were talking about. And so they do blood samples and do a, you know, full review of your hormones, everything that they can get from your blood analysis. And then they send it to an AI system, which then can diagnose it and come back to certain conclusions. And this allows them to offer, and then they can prescribe medicine. And I may have been on Rogan because he was talking about how he owns, it's very difficult to own your own pharmacy, but that's how one of the ways you can kind of offer lower cost medical expenses. And so his whole thing was that AI is allowing him as an individual to lower personal health, like high quality personalized health. And it's all tied to a reviewing of your biological data through the AI.
Yeah.
So it gets right back to what you're just saying.
Yeah. And Bob, you know, look, man, I had a lot of respect for what Bobby said and did throughout the you know, lockdowns. I mean, he was a figure that gave me and a lot of people some hope. You know, I like the stance he took on a lot of stuff, but I mean, the guy's got new age folk in his as well. And, you know, one of them is Marianne Williamson. Yeah, Marianne Williamson. I don't want to I don't want to. I was going to try to find it. One of these books. Oh, wait. I think it's this one right here. Yeah, can you see the very top of that?
Here,
Marianne Williamson. It's a quote from Marianne Williamson.
Okay.
She you know, one of Hubbard's, I guess, I don't know if protege is the right word, but right, somebody that took after her, right? And so, you know, again, we got the same folk in that crowd. So, you know, we'll see. You know, that's one of the things I'm a little more hopeful for, is at least getting the dyes and stuff. I mean, I'm all about that. That's a great idea. But we'll see where it goes.
Absolutely. So moving through the article, I want to, get towards the next couple sections. This conversation's been fantastic. So thank you again, brother. This has been great. I wanted to highlight this last section here of the next block quote coming from Hubbard. And she says, a new type of human is emerging in the face of our shared global crisis. I call these pioneers universal humans. This new person is moving toward cosmic consciousness and an ever deepening spirituality. So no need to elaborate too much unless you have something, but it hits on, I thought that was perfect because it was the next one. And we've actually been nailing that for probably the last 20 minutes or so. And that she just kind of reiterates the same thing there.
One little thing I know. So she also uses the universal human. She also uses the term Homo universalis. Now, the guy that took over her foundation for conscious evolution is a guy that's going to pop up in the next article. His name's Mark Gaffney. If you Google or search engine Mark Gaffney, Dr. You'll see a really creepy interview in which he tries to defend accusations that he was involved in illicit things with underage girls. Okay. But so he's got this thing called cosmo-erotic humanism. and he's gonna, his idea of the universal human, he calls it like homo amoris or something. Mark Gaffney with a C. Gaffney.
Oh, Gaffney. Okay. Sorry.
Yeah. Mark. So it's M-A-R-C, Mark. And then space Gaffney is G-A-F-N-I.
Okay.
Yeah. And so and it I don't want to digress too much, but there's a Tantra comes up a lot in the next article. And that's from what I've gathered and the little bit that it's not something that I ever wanted to spend too much time researching, but that's where Crowley sex magic comes from.
Very interesting.
Hindu and Tibetan.
I had never heard of this guy before, so this is a new one on me.
Yeah.
Okay, Mark. Here it is, Mark Gaffney. Aha.
Dude, I'm sorry, but okay. Now, would you ever want to be involved in something called cosmo-erotic anything? Especially if it was like new age, like group culty stuff. And especially if the head dude was a guy that is, I don't know if he was actually convicted, but when he tries to defend himself on Dr. Phil, he just makes it look worse. I mean, he almost, it's been a while since I listened. I don't want to misquote anything because, that I don't want to libel, etc.
Return to Eros.
Yeah, that's the other part about it, right? That Eros, is like the radical love, and like if you wanted to say that love was like sort of the metaphysical, Jungian sense, like the archetype of the soul that is the crux of goodness and human evolution or whatever. Why wouldn't you go with agape? Eros, it's like the lowest form, the five.
Yeah, exactly.
Have for love, you know what I mean? Like,
right.
Yeah, interesting. So,
yeah, very, very interesting. I was just checking out the early life real quick. Okay, interesting stuff. Kind of fits with the general theme here. So last block quote of Hubbard before we move into the next section of your article is she says, we entered the birth canal. The meta crisis of limits began. Resource shortage, overpopulation, pollution, alienation, confusion, malaise about the future, disconnection with the past. Experts with a womb perspective advocated a return to a simpler past, an adaptation to limits, a program of maximum conservation and no growth. Futurists wrote of a paradigm shift from self-centered to whole-centered. Evolutionaries evangelized the extended gospel of Christ's capacities for all. Simultaneously, these capacities turned on. These were the postnatal technologies developed within the womb of Earth for use after birth in the universal environment beyond the biospheric womb of Earth. Astronautics, genetics, longevity, cybernetics, and robotics.
Yeah, you can see the dog. Well, not dog whistles. Dog whistles are quieter, but the references to limits to growth again. The limits references to the Christ consciousness, references to overpopulation. One thing we haven't really noted is so she mentions astronautics there. She was she was very much a proponent of like space exploration. That was part of the reason why she was like disagreed with people like Pecci on like how hardcore of a Malthusian do we have to be, because she thought, well, we can go to other planets and get stuff. And I just note that because, you know, back to Musk, it's another thing that he's all right, we're going to Mars now. So you know, it's just something I thought I'd know there.
No, I kind of look at it as the spacefaring narrative is the sort of transcendent frontier of this worldview regarding their sort of spiritual paradigm. So there's an individual transcendence in regards to personal capabilities, but then there's like the new frontier, the new exploration, and this is a sort of exciting dimension of their mythology that is replaced. It's not about the kingdom of God. Well, we're going to establish utopia here, which is sort of their second garden of Eden. But the spacefaring civilization, you know, looking at black holes and galaxies far off. I'm personally skeptical of much of modern cosmology and the worldview that they put forth, but it certainly has taken on a religious dimension. I remember when I was in my early 20s and kind of new age, you know, the Carl Sagans of the world and Neil deGrasse Tyson's and Hubble Space Telescope was like my religious iconography.
Yeah. Well, and you know that the UFO movement, there's a weird and very large overlap between that and the New Age, right? You know, so we sort of cut it in half. We were like, there's the crystal natural people, there's the technology people, there's like a weird. So like when people channel, like when they do the, you know, the whatever they do to channel, you know, get into their they meditate or whatever they do, you know, some of those people think they're channeling like angels, you know, theurgy, like or maybe demons or like metaphysical entities. Some people think they're channeling aliens from another planet. Right. Like there was a woman, I mean, I'm not being mean or pay. One of the women, she didn't actually show up for the debate, but she was in the episode where they were talking about the article I did. And it starts off, and I linked to it in one of the articles, so you might be able to find it.
I'll have to look for that.
But she it's on my Telegram. She said she was doing some channeling, and she said she looked like she fully believed that she was speaking to aliens from or entities from the planet or the next Galexa. It was called Galexa, wherever this was. Now Lawrence Rockefeller, I think you had the Collins brothers on times, right? And I think they've mentioned multiple times that he's really big he might have been involved with Stephen Greer at one point. I think the disclosure. I think maybe I think I'm getting a visual image of the Wikipedia page where it said that, and that my memory might be foggy there. But it's just another one of these ways in which you know, the UFO outer space stuff dovetails with the occult and the mystical of the New Age. And you know, like you, I'm skeptical of like how far can we go and how far can we get out? Like, you know, what is outer space? How far do we get there? You know, it was always interesting to me that, you know, again, you know, this woman's talking about channeling. Now, if you could channel, if an alien can get here from if you could channel them like interdimensionally, metaphysically, why do they need UFOs? Like there's something about it, like right? It's mutually exclusive. But notice that, remember, you know, think of the term astral projection.
Right.
Like, you know, I wonder how much inner space and outer space to them is the same thing. Like, I wonder if these people think that when they do their OBE, out of body experience, or channeling, that like the reason they call it astral projection is they think that their soul or whatever is literally going out to wherever the stars are. I don't know, but I mean, it's totally incoherent, right? When you try to like make all,
but it's together. That blurring of boundaries. It's the dissolution of boundaries over again. Inner space, outer space. It's the same space that I can consciously travel, essentially.
Yep. Yeah, the monad. The at-one-ment is the term they use, like atonement, but at-one-ment, they put hyphens in it.
At-one-ment.
Cute, right?
The next section, and we haven't even really mentioned his name outside the title. I just mentioned it briefly, but Jonas Salk. So the next section, you have Hubbard and Salk, Kindred Consciousnesses, Malthusian Evolutionaries. Can you speak a little bit to the role Jonas Salk has with Barbara Hubbard and what you're trying to convey here in this article?
Yeah, so they basically shared the same ideas about overpopulation and conscious evolution. They met a while back, early on in her career. So it's most of the quotes you're getting are from this book, but she talks about him and a few others, but the extended sort of narrative is in here. And she helped him. So when he was getting ready to start the Salk Institute, he largely wanted to focus on, biology, right? The hard sciences, but he also wanted to, we talked about that culture has to evolve with the technology to get everybody to get on board. And so he wanted Hubbard to run, I forget what he phrased it, but it was like a theater of culture, a theater of humanity, or theater of
like
art.
that. That's what it was in your, some type of.
Yeah. And so she was basically going to be the humanities part of the Salk Institute. She was going to, fill people's heads with conscious evolution and noosphere and all this type of stuff about, this is the new ideology that we need to evolve along with whatever technologies we come up with at the Salk Institute. So I looked at 3 of his books to see sort of what he said about evolution, overpopulation, and to see how it lined up with Hubbard. So I mean, it's worth noting that I think they refer to each other as kindred spirits.
Yeah.
Something to her like, she said that like we're both mutants, but like in a good way. Like we are the evolved species, and he used the phrase mutant. Man Unfolding, Survival of the Wisest, and World Population and Human Values. The last one he wrote with his son. I believe it's Man Unfolding, if my memory serves me correctly, where he refers to this concept of being and ego. So basically he says that like it's very conscious evolution. And he actually uses that phrase at a speech at something called the Lindisfarne Association, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. So in Man Unfolding, he's basically saying that the physiology evolves through the dialectic between, I think it's genetics and somatics. So the genetics is like the code, and the somatics is like the ways that the cells arrange themselves based on the information in the DNA. But then he says that culture, right, or psychology and culture as a unit evolves through 2 things he calls being and ego. And he doesn't very explicitly or clearly suggest that he has some concept of a metaphysic involved in consciousness. But the way he just talks about being, it really is more like a collective thing, right?
Right.
And so the ego is like your individual expression of it, and sort of the being is sort of like the cultural hermeneutics that kind of filter your ego, and that both of these dialectics between being and ego and genetics and somatics, they both have to come together. Otherwise, one can't, they're like, 2 legs on an animal. One can't get forward without the other. Right. Now it's interesting to note, like this idea of being and ego. I mean, you can't help but think, psychology, Maslow's psychology of being.
Yep.
Right? And he's sort of bringing that human potential theory into this. But like de Chardin and like Hubbard, he pretty much believed that overpopulation was one of the crises that was going to be this inflection point, where at that point, we're going to have to get that being and that ego to evolve new values, so that way we can harness our technology and our industry in ways that can avert this Malthusian crisis. He goes more into detail about the sort of the population dynamics in Survival of the Wisest. And so he looked at some studies that were done on fruit fly populations and other insects and animals that reproduce. I think lemmings was the other one. And basically he wanted to see, well, some species, they just reproduce, and then they just crash. Some, like, they level out, kind of, right? And he's like, well, what are we going to do? And he says, well, who knows? But, in case we're going on the trajectory of the fruit fly population, we need to make some interventions. And these are your typical Malthusian interventions, right? Regulating births, et cetera, et cetera. He reiterates the same thing in the book World Population and Human Values, which is financed by the United Nations. And then later on,
surprise.
Yeah, and at the Lindisfarne Association, now this is something that was set up by a guy by the name of William Irwin Thompson. He was sort of a, I don't know if protege is the right word, but he's somebody that was sort of cut from the rug of David Spangler, who's a guy, he's a Luciferian. All right. He's one of these guys where if you call him a Luciferian, he'll quibble about what Lucifer means, but he's a Luciferian. Okay. And at the Lindisfarne Association, he had Jonas Salk there. The audio's at the very end of the article, so you can check that out. You can listen to it. And they're like, it was those two camps that I sort of talked about, was like, the hardcore Malthusians versus the other more techno optimists that think that some of that stuff can be averted. But the title of his speech is like Conscious Evolution and the Evolution of Consciousness. And if you've ever had to like read or listen to any of these like new age conscious evolutionary types, like for a long time, dude, it's like, I'm going to tell you, this is it's actually almost verbatim, but this is how he starts his speech. He says something like, it's not going to be in the perfect order, but he's like, so if we take the evolution of consciousness and we add the consciousness of evolution, and then we also bring in the consciousness of consciousness and the evolution of evolution. I swear to you. And he takes words, rearranges them in every way that you can make, and purports to be like extracting meaning from this. Like, and this is typical kind of new age gobbledygook. But within that paradigm, he's debating with, it's Gregory Bateson. Gregory Bateson was one of these guys who was at the Macy's cybernetics conferences. He was an anthropologist. I think his dad or his granddaddy was William Bateson. He's the guy that coined the term genetics. Gregory was married to Margaret Mead. These people pop up in all these new age circles as well. Yep. But he's one of these guys that was really into like systems dynamics. And so they're having a debate about
cybernetics.
Yes. Yeah. And William Irwin Thompson goes, so there's a quote in there at the end, and it says something like, he's positing these two trajectories. And one of them, he says, is, basically, there's always just the total Malthusian collapse, like the fruit fly population. Another possibility is he says that he says something like the military industrial complex, elite scientists and technocrats will exploit crises in order to basically have a dystopic global society in which crises are not only exploited, but astroturfed, like to manage populations. Like in other words, we'll get to a point where no, the population problem can't be solved, but we can keep these people under control by fomenting crisis after crisis. The third option for William Irwin Thompson is that it's basically the same thing. It's just like has a positive spin out. He says something like, if you go down to the comments section, I quote it. In particular, in response to somebody that thought I was inaccurate, which they agreed that I was not after the fact. But it's something like, can we create a global brain of elites who will wield this stuff benevolently, is basically his solution. So one way or another, they all agree, like, we're going to have to control population to some degree, and we're going to have some cybernetic system to do so. And there's probably some kind of an elite at the top. It's just like, are they going to be benevolent or are they going to be bad? Right. That's pretty much it.
Yeah. And whose definition of the two? That's a big one. Let me read just a few of the quick snippets, paragraphs here of Jonas Salk, and then we'll move to the next section regarding Lawrence Rockefeller and get a little bit into some of the funding behind all this stuff. So as you mentioned at the beginning, this is a quote. So Hubbard says, Jonas and I want to bring forth in the arts a new image of humanity commensurate with our capacity to shape the future. And then Jonas Salk replied, Barbara, you and I are scooped out of the same genetic material. We're psychological mutants. Every now and then, evolution produces precisely the right type of person for the needs of the time. You're such a person, a bearer of evolution. It's all in you. You've got the script inside, the attraction for the future, the desire to be responsible for the whole. your willingness to learn, to connect separate disciplines and people. You're a bivalent bonding mechanism. You've got hooks on both sides. Both.
Well, one of the things I wanted to note too is I'm giving you all a little preview of the next piece. So that Lindisfarne Association is interesting because it ends up at the Manitou Foundation. That was that place I told you about, the New Age community at Crestone. It ends up there, and in between ending where Hubbard would speak, which was owned again by Maurice Strong, who was her buddy at the World Future Society. Also her
you got
ally.
a photo of him down here, I believe.
Yeah, I think it's 3 of them
right there.
side by side. Yep, there he is. Strong's on the right. There's Gorbachev on the left. That's Stephen Rockefeller in the middle. He was at the State of the World Foundation, that forum. He is Lawrence's nephew. He's also on Green Cross. I think it's Green Cross International, one of those sustainable development organizations that either Gorbachev, Strong, or both of them put together, because there's ones they did on their own, then they combined them into other ones, and then but at the so Lindisfarne ends up there. Hubbard speaks there, but before it goes there, so I have the memoirs by it. Oh, I'll grab this one. Here's that book. Here's that book that I mentioned. This is by Christine Chandler. It's called Enthralled.
Oh,
okay, and it's creepy. Like I got all kind of notes in it. It's creepy.
That's about the Dalai Lama.
It's about the lamas in general, the Tibetan lamas in general. Now, her experience was with a guy by the name of Chogyam Trungpa. He was one of the first people to bring the Tibetan Tantra and stuff, like 60s or 70s. And she was like one of his, I don't know, disciple or acolyte is the word. And, eventually came out of this, realized she was basically in a cult. These are her words. I'm using her words. But then at one point, so they were with Trungpa prior to moving to Crestone. When they get to Crestone, there's they're all the titles they use are Rinpoche. I mean, I thought I knew quite a bit about Hinduism and Buddhism before I started actually having to write on some. I realized that the cosmology, as you know, I mean, there's so many different terms and deities and things. It's hard to keep track
especially
of.
Tibetan. That's where, side note, but the monolithic claims when you're talking about Hinduism and Buddhism, it really doesn't hold up if you're going to be nuanced and specific when talking about those topics. It's actually very complex.
Oh yeah, Hinduism wasn't even a term until you go back and whichever deities, those were all considered different religions, just like there's all those different languages out there, right? I mean, it's almost like that. And they had a lot of them, if you look at, they call Tantra the left-hand path. Even a lot of Hindus are like, yeah, we don't mess around with that Tantra stuff, and a lot of the Buddhists as well. So like Rinpoche, Chilkane, I can't pronounce it, but Rinpoche is a title they have. And she was, so I looked up some of the stuff about these people that she suggested. Dude, there's public records. It's not just her accusations. Like some of them were pretty clearly yeah, they did that stuff. Other ones is could you win in a court of law? Maybe not, but it's would you want to come on, what would you really conclude looking at the evidence? But it ends up, the Lindisfarne ends up there. And before that, here's this book. This is The Game Caller. That's a picture of Marion Petty. Okay. By Terrell. This is, so The Finders. And it's a creepy cult that was, finally started gaining more attention a few years ago. And so there's a point in this narrative. So Terrell goes with another guy, Roy Mason, who's a member of the World Future Society. He was like an architect for them, I think. He's an architect. And World Future Society, remember, founded by Barbara Marx Hubbard. Does it say that specifically on here? Yeah, it says it here on the back of this. This is a citation. I can't see it. It says that she founded. She's a co-founder of it. And again, Maurice Strong was on the global advisory board there with her. So Roy Mason and Terrell, they both go they go on this trip. It's interesting. So they go on these, Marion Petty would send them on games. They play these games, and it was just like, leave the commune with no money and don't come back till you have $100. It was just like weird, kind of like Gurdjieffian kind of push you past your limits type thing, right? And so he sends them on this field trip. The first place they go is to let me just pull it up. I got it's bookmarked. So the first place they go is there it is. It's American Human Psychology Annual Convention, Human Potential. Okay. Then the next place they go, it's way up. It's up in Canada on the East Coast. Then they come down and they stop. Oh, and at that conference is Trungpa, the guy I just mentioned, that right, the Tantra guy. So then on their way back down south, they go, we stopped in Boston to help Barbara Marx Hubbard set up one of her SynCons. SynCon, it's these synergistic conferences. They bring people from different disciplines together to solve these global problems, and then they cordon them off with like plywood walls. And then when each group dynamic solved its problem or came up with its best solution, they'd remove a wall, and then those two groups would come together and synthesize those problems until at the end everybody's going to create utopia, right? Well, he says that on the way. And he said that they'd helped her a few times. Shortly thereafter, on the way from there, they stop at where the Lindisfarne Association was located before it was here, before it was at Crestone. And in here, he says that Marion Petty and Toby Terrell, that they had tried to broker a deal to give Thompson the land for his new location for the Lindisfarne Association. And during that discussion, it's not clear whether or not the Barbara that's involved in that negotiation is Hubbard or another Barbara that they mention it was the finder. It's a memoir. He's not taking the time to make sure you're following who's who and what's what sometimes.
Right.
The last time, the only Barbara mentioned in that section is Hubbard. He's not, the other Barbara is not mentioned, and it's maybe a paragraph in between, and he's saying Barbara was, so it's one way or another. On that trip, you got one finder's trip that ties together the Tibetan Tantrists, the Human Potential Movement, Barbara Marx Hubbard, the Lindisfarne Association, and then those things all end up here where Hubbard ends up with Strong again.
Wow.
So, very peculiar.
Yeah, very interesting web of associations and events. So next block quote regarding Jonas Salk. This is Hubbard mirrors Salk's call for Malthusian population control as an essential element of collective I think this is from Barbara Hubbard, right?
Yeah, I think that one's
is in Alternative to Armageddon, the one that I falsely credited earlier. So this one right here.
Yep.
And she says they had reached a limit to growth, pollution, stagnation, overpopulation. In the late period of the biosphere, human beings have reached a point where they can no longer continue to reproduce themselves. They have reached a limit to growth on planet Earth. To reproduce yourselves, you are transcending yourselves. You have discovered the pattern of synergistic self-organization. Synergizing humans working to overcome limits become the pattern in which the co-creative human emerges. So it gets back to what you were calling those SynCons, those synergistic. You can see that language replete throughout this block quote.
Yeah, and that was a term that it might not have been Buckminster Fuller that coined it, but he definitely popularized it before Hubbard did. So that's, think of the buckyball, the idea of synergizing all the nodes together into like this organic unit. Yeah, that's an interesting little graph there, just because it kind of shows you that's from world population and human values, and it kind of shows you, if you look at the outside, like how from the biological to the institutional and to the cultural to social, like it's kind of an interesting little graph. It's very basic, but just to kind of show you how
it has a very Maslow type feel to it.
Yeah, yeah. There's other in the map, in the book, like so that's all the things put together, but like just the triangles in the middle and just so like he goes through separately, and then at the end he shows how they all come together and like throughout the book. So,
and so this next block quote, this is Hubbard, again. This was in the one that we just mentioned, the Revelation Alternative to Armageddon. And so she wrote regarding, no, this is in verbatim, the revolution of our crisis at birth, the one that I falsely attributed earlier. So Hubbard wrote, at a time of quantum transformation, be fruitful and multiply goes too far and becomes overpopulation. Those darn Christians. Preserve all life goes too far and results in undesirable technological prolongation of animal/human existence. Give food and shelter to the people becomes the over-industrialization, pollution, inflation, and resource depletion of the developed world. The feedback from the environment is rapidly informing you to stop doing in the future what was necessary in the past. Be fruitful and multiply becomes consciously conceived chosen children who will be given the opportunity of optimum development. Preserve all life becomes the opportunity for chosen death and chosen extended life. Thanatology and gerontology enter the scene. Death can be chosen by those who have finished their work on Earth. The purpose of advanced medical technology is not to maintain animal/human bodies in a semi-vegetative state. It is to be used by the minds motivated to do new work and the new environments of outer space to extend life, change bodies, and eventually build new bodies accustomed to the new conditions of universal life. Gosh.
Yeah. I mean, it just reminds me of I don't remember, we talked about that before the show started, but the Canadian euthanasia commercials.
Exactly. Exactly. In the name of health. I mean, well, wasn't it a Dutch girl that was one of the first ones to do it in Europe? That was last year. I think it was like within the last 6 months, and she voluntarily killed her. And there's nothing wrong with her. She was like 24 years old. And this was celebrated. It's just, we live in upside down.
The quantum the little dimension of the time of quantum transformation. It's not something that I covered a whole lot in, well, really at all in the series, but there's reference to, right? If you ever remember that the New Age is kind of trying to lend itself scientific credence and then trying to make science more spiritual. And like quantum mechanics is one of those things because, double slit experiment, it sort of, challenges in some ways the laws of logic, right? Is it a particle or is it a wave, right? Is it here or is it there? Is it in two places at the same time, right? It's sort of the quantum mechanical sciences is sort of the corollary to what they would call the non-dualistic thinking of a lot of the stuff that's pulled from the left-hand path of the Tibetan stuff that I talk about in the next article. And and this goes in general for most cults, whether they adhere to a Tibetan esotericism or some other form of mysticism or whatever is their mode of mind control, essentially, and that is this non-dualistic thinking, right? Like, the idea is that you're not being exploited, you're not being abused, you're thinking of it in terms of like abuser, and like this thing's just happening to you because you didn't think positively enough, or you manifested it because you didn't have your mind oriented right, or this is just the challenge the universe is giving to you so that you can overcome and evolve. And so that whole there's a whole I think it's called the Renaissance. I think Hubbard is also a part of it. But the Dalai Lama had a lot of very prominent physicists and quantum theorists, and they, they'd sit around and talk about how, quantum theory affirms, their sort of their cosmology and vice versa. So,
right. Okay, next section has to do with Hubbard and the sustainable Malthusian globalism of the Rockefeller dynasty. Now, we've kind of mentioned Lawrence Rockefeller a few times. You want to kind of give the snippet of what it is you're trying to highlight here in regards to him funding Barbara Hubbard and much of this this worldview regarding conscious evolution?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that he find almost every one of her major publications, almost every one of her books, she has some mention of gratitude to him in the acknowledgement section. He helped fund her foundation for conscious evolution, which is where that guy Gaffney is now the head of it. So he basically, he was into the UFO and the New Age stuff. He's into the transhumanist stuff. He's into the sustainable development stuff, and his sort of backing of Hubbard. All those things come together in her, right? So he's backing her because she's pushing the New Age spirituality. He's backing her because she's pushing the transhumanism that he's financing through Venrock and the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, and also the sustainable development stuff largely through Rockefeller Brothers Fund as well. Now, Lawrence himself, he also, I think I mentioned it, but he financed that Manitou Foundation, where all that Crestone stuff was at as well. He also was involved. He helped, I think it was UNCHI, the UN Conference on the Human Environment. It was one of the environmental conferences that was set up by Maurice Strong. So Strong, he basically got the entire environmental movement. I mean, he's like probably the most important single individual. So he first in it's either 1971 or 1972, he set up the UN on the human environment. Out of that comes the UNEP, UN Environmental Program. He becomes the first director of the UNEP. Okay. A few years later, he's part of the Brundtland Commission, where the term sustainable development wasn't coined, but was basically adopted and popularized. It was actually coined maybe a year or so before that by in a paper that was written by an organization's connected to the UN. I can't remember the specific one. It's in my database. You can find it. And then shortly thereafter, again, a few years later, it's about 20 years to the date after the UNCHI conference, he set up the UN Rio conference. Out of that comes Agenda 21. And then out of that comes Agenda 23. So all of that is Murray Strong. And Lawrence Rockefeller is there at one of the first, one of those early conferences. Lawrence also helped. So he set up in a conservation, he financed a lot of, you've seen the cover to that book. It's like Catalyst for Conservation or something. He financed a lot of national and state level and nonprofit and NGO environmental. Well, before we had the term sustainable development, it was under the umbrella of conservation. One of them basically merges with the World Wildlife Fund later on. The World Wildlife Fund was also Strong was also, I can't remember his role at the WWF, but it was some board level or executive level position. Mm-hmm. And the World Wildlife Fund was set up by three people were involved in setting it up. So one is Julian Huxley. So here he comes again. Another one is Prince Philip. And another one is Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands. Right? Prince Bernhard was a former Nazi SS soldier. Prince Philip's the guy that said he wanted to be reincarnated as a virus so that he could, cull the population. Right. Julian Huxley, I think the quote is in there. It's from UNESCO, Its Purpose and Its Philosophy. In that book, UNESCO, Its Purpose and Its Philosophy, it's the seminal work that UNESCO publishes. It basically lays out their mission statement. In the first article in the series, I quote where he talks about we need to have a global eugenics program. In this article, I quote right there. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
So this is Julian Huxley. He says the recognition of the idea of an optimum population size, of course, relative to technological and social conditions, is an indispensable first step towards that planned control of populations, which is necessary if man's blind reproductive urges are not to wreck his ideals and his plans for material and spiritual betterment. The recognition of the fact that the wildlife of the world is irreplaceable, but that it is being rapidly destroyed, is necessary if we are to realize in time that areas must be set aside where, in the ultimate interest of mankind as a whole, the spread of man must take a second place to the conservation of other species.
Yeah, that's in UNESCO, its purpose and its philosophy. You can read. Well, there's a link to it in the article. You can read it. So that's what your World Wildlife Fund is. And then right after that, I kind of noted that it was a few years ago. I think it was either right before, or right after lockdowns. David Attenborough made some comment about overpopulation with a lot of brown people from the so-called third world, and everybody was like, what are you suggesting? Are you suggesting that those are the people that need to be removed? And like, he had to apologize. And the World Wildlife Fund everybody was like, because it was a racist implication of his argument about overpopulation. But Lawrence Rockefeller, I mean, so Julian, right? We just quoted from him. He
right.
Was also the president of the British Eugenics Society.
Yep. Even well after it was discredited, I bring this up in my dissertation I'm writing on transhumanism, is that after people were already so like distancing themselves from the eugenics movement, Julian Huxley was still a proud promoter of it.
Yeah. And the British Eugenics Society was called the British Eugenics Society until like 1980, late 80s. I think it's mid. I don't think it's early 80s. I think it's like 88 or 89. I can't remember. Then they changed their name to the Galton Institute. And just recently, like this year or last year, they changed it. Now it's called Adelphi Genetics. So they got a third name now. Okay. But, it's one of these things where it's like, yeah, they didn't even change. I mean, the American Eugenics Society changed its name like the 60s, late 60s, maybe early 70s. It's like this Society for Social Biology or Biodemography or something like that. It went through 3 changes as well. But like the Americans, we changed that. We changed the name to that a lot earlier. The British, they kept it for a while. But that eugenics movement, the reason I'm mentioning it is because Lawrence got a lot of his ideas about conservation from a guy by the name of, there's a bunch of Osborns. They're all eugenicists, Malthusians. Friedrich Osborn's the cousin. Okay. He's the one that was part of the Rockefeller's Population Council. Okay. And then is it his dad or his uncle or maybe it's his cousin is Henry Fairfield Osborn Jr. That was Lawrence's, I guess, like kind of his mentor. Now the dad would have been senior, Henry Fairfield. One of them was, he might have been a founder of the American Eugenics Society or the president or both. The specifics is in the article. But they all come out of the American eugenics movement, and Junior, Henry Fairfield Osborn Jr. inspired Lawrence to basically, there's a book. This is another sort of Malthusian tract. Oh, look at this. I've never noticed this. I've had this book. I never bothered to look at the back of it. Got a blurb from Aldous Huxley. It says, in our plundered planet, Mr. Osborn has told with admirable clarity the story of man's ignorant or wanton disregard of the fundamental laws of life and of the terrible revenges which nature has taken and is still taking inexorably against those who have outraged her. May the book attract the attention which, by reason of its all-important subject matter and the lucidity of its style, so richly diverse. But it's very it's one of the darker outlooks on overpopulation. This is like let's see, what's the date on this? Well, I don't want to waste your time trying to find the date on it, but this is sort of the backdrop of Lawrence's kind of his outlook on what becomes sustainable development, but with a Malthusian bent, and that sort of lines up with, Hubbard's, everything we've read that she said. She also spoke at the UN, I think it's called the High Level Political Forum on Sustainable Development, promoting the SDGs there as well. So again, all these people, right, the vectors all converge. And so that's sort of the significance of Lawrence's involvement in Hubbard's career.
Wow. 1948. So
48. Okay. Oh, so there we go. This is like probably almost the same year as UNESCO, its purpose and its philosophy. I want to say that's 46, 47 or something like that. 47, wow. 48 maybe. So,
and then the next block quote. Sorry to jump from block quote to block quote. So if there's something I'm missing or you want to address, feel free. You can always cut me off. No problem. But and here you mentioned Sir David Attenborough, and his membership at the WEF, of course. And the wildlife conservation and population control are similarly hitched together by Hubbard, an alternative to Armageddon, one that we've referenced and have the link to on archive, which asserts that in order to save animals from killers, a planetary tribulation must ensue so that the killers must not survive to become universal humans. And so in this quote, it reads, human history has been a difficult and yet incomplete effort to overcome the mammalian defect programmed in our genes, killing animals and each other. We are heading toward the birth canal again with this defect uncorrected. Hundreds of millions are still killing animals and each other. This is why tribulations must be so severe on your planet. The killers must not survive to become universal humans. And when I read this, I was wondering, are you familiar with the transhumanist David Pearce? You ever heard of him?
Oh, I always thought it was Pierce, right?
Is it Pierce?
P-A-R-C-E?
Yes.
P-E-A-R-C-E. Yeah, you know,
Pierce.
I feel like well, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, he has this idea.
Go ahead.
Yeah, his hedonistic transhumanism. So he's a what's called a negative utilitarian, and he wants to put electrodes not only in humans to rewrite so that you would have no pain response. So pain, because he wants to eliminate suffering. He also has this idea that he wants to put electrodes within carnivorous animal species so that they will no longer kill other animals, so that we can have this sort of transhumanist utopian future with no killing. And so when I read that block quote, I thought, wow, interesting. That sounds right in line with his abolitionist project. Yeah.
Well, this is interesting. So this is why I know. I was like, wait, is that the guy? I wanted to make sure. David, this is how I know who he is. So I've been teaching Brave New World in my English 102 class for, I don't know. I mean, how long have I been teaching now? Almost 15 years now. The way that I teach it, without the students having to buy anything, which is nice, is there's a website where you can get a copy of it. You can type it in right now and show people. Type in huxley.net. All right. If you type in huxley.net, you'll see that it's a useful resource. Hopefully he doesn't take it down now, because I use it to teach my class, and it's the only free copy that there's probably others. Okay. Go all the way to the bottom. First, go up to the top and read what it says at the top. I'm sorry. It says Brave New World, a defense of paradise engineering. Now go to the bottom, scroll all the way down. Look at who curates the website.
There he is. Yep.
Yeah. Because dude, so there's Brave New World is in there. Brave New World Revisit is, if you want to read those primary texts, you can go there. But he's got all kinds of commentary on it, and it's all the stuff you're talking about. And that's been there for quite a while. I think was he buddies with Bostrom too?
Yes, they're close.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. So he's basically telling you that Brave New World is a utopia. And listen, Huxley, I think for him, it's like a dark comedy, all this. Like, I think that he actually, if there's any critique in there, it's that industrialists are running the show instead of the enlightened scientists, something to that effect. But if you read his nonfiction, there's not a policy in there that he hadn't espoused. So, I think it was more of just a way to acclimate the public to, I think he really thought it was utopic. And it's actually based on, Julian Huxley also wrote a novel called What Dare I Think? And in that one, he basically paints the same type of, dystopia, utopia, depends on your perspective. Same situation as Brave New World, but he was trying to suggest that it was a good thing, and that the problem was for him what do you do with the religious part of the psyche? Like, how do you recondition that to conform? I'm going to actually have an article, might become a book, where I break a lot of this down. It's hopefully going to show up in a Rutledge publication as part of a conference I just did in Poland a few years ago.
Oh, wow.
So, yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah. So,
And that's so to wrap up the article here. You want to explain this last section regarding crisis reaction solution?
Yeah, I just kind of, I like to steel man stuff. I try not to get too,
Absolutely.
Bombastic and overstate my claims and stuff. So kind of what I'm looking at there is like, and we kind of speculated on like, well, what's in these people's head? Like, what do they really believe? I mean, we see what they're doing, but like, what are their motivations? How much of it is just rhetoric to get us to follow? Like, do they really think that this overpopulation thing is legit? Are they like fomenting these crises in order to gain control? Right. Whether or not, I mean, that's kind of a moot point, right? The main point is that, and we've been living through endless crisis after crisis. Hopefully one thing we've all learned is that more important than the implications of or dangers of the purported crisis, more important is how we respond. And in other words, it's I think the phrase I use is incumbent upon us to balk when we are offered solutions that are worse than the so-called purported, whether legit, astroturfed, exploited, etc., the crisis itself, right? The last 4 or 5 years, most of the solutions that have been offered for all the crises have been of that nature. So
right.
That's kind of the way I ended it was kind of to say like, listen, even if you think, because by the way, there was quite a few people on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call it, that were like, we are overpopulated. And there was like people arguing like pro eugenic stuff. I don't even respond to those comments. Like,
in the name of progressivism too. It's hilarious.
Yeah. And so it was part of that's kind of for those people. It's like, listen, wherever you fall on like, are we overpopulated? Should we be progressing or evolving as a civilization, whether that's Darwinian or conscious or just, improving, industry, etc. Regardless of where you fall on that, we need to take consideration that like whatever we do, we don't make things worse. So right. That's the best. That's the best solution I go, because you're not going to stop the crises. You're certainly not going to stop, propaganda that, that stirs up a crisis that's not there either, right? All you can really do. Yeah. So.
Right. Is there anything? So thank you so much, brother, for coming on. I know I've kept you a lot longer than I told you. I was saying, oh, well, you got 2 hours. We're at 3 hours and 14 minutes, but this has been an incredible conversation, and I would love to maybe do another one over the fourth installment of this series if you're available on the next articles, because it's going to have a little bit different flavor to it.
Oh, yeah.
And the focus. But your knowledge and recall is fantastic, man, and you sharing your insights and some of your research. I feel very appreciative of it. I'm sure many people in the chat have as well. So thank you for that. And if we have a few super chats, some questions that if you have a minute, we could address those real quick. But I want to promote anything that you want. So I've already shared. Let me pull it back up. So here's again the link to the article, which is the third installment in a 4-part series. And then I had your which one was your website? There it is. Then here's your website, and then I also wanted to share the link to your book. Do you prefer if people get it on Amazon or not? I don't know if some people prefer to get it from your website.
It's better for Trying Day if you get it from Trying Day. I mean, if you get it from Amazon, I can at least, it's the only gauge I have to see like whether it's selling or not. Actively. But either one, whichever one is easy for you. The link to the Trying Day is on that website. So I think there's like a button that said buy now or something.
Okay. Let me go to it.
Yeah, I think unless okay, good. The link still works.
There. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
And I'll share that link. So preferably buy it from this link if you guys want. That is the second link. So I just shared that right there.
Yeah. And so, but yeah, I was going to say, if we could also, if you're interested, we can come back and we can talk about that book too. And, Charlie's Repeat and that whole thing. Cause that's a whole, it's related. I get into Skull and Bones in there quite a bit. I don't know if you know that Charlotte Thompson Iserbeat is the reason why Anthony Sutton was able to do his expose on the Order of Skull and Bones. Her father, her father and grandfather were members of the order, and
man, you've been doing some Wing Chun in there?
Yes, sir. I've been doing that for, let's see, I'm almost a quarter century. Not the Chun itself. Taekwondo goes back that far. I've been doing Wing Chun probably 20 years. These are the physical address book. These are the Skull and Bones. Now they've been cut because she scanned them and so did I. But you can kind of see it here. These are the black the Skull and Bones black books. So this whole occult topic kind of dovetails with it, and obviously transhumanism, etc. So if you ever want, we can tackle that one too. Yeah.
I'd be very interested. Absolutely. I would again really appreciate of your knowledge and your recall, your expertise in things. It's actually been really insightful for me, this conversation. You've connected a few dots that I didn't have connected yet, just in the conversation and the discourse. So really appreciative of that.
Well, thank you. I mean, I'm a big fan of the show. I'm going to do a cheesy pun here. It's been nice for you to let me ride your coattails. I had to do it. I'm sorry. But yeah. And if people want to see, if people want to check these out, I have them on. There's a link to my database on that website. It's one of the only things that I actually charge for besides the book. I update it weekly. It's a monthly subscription, $5 a month. It's like, in some ways it's just a nice way for you to be able to support me. But what you get is an access to this 3D. It's basically like Richard Grove's brain database.
Is that through the website? How do I share that? I want to promote whatever.
So if you go to the website, there's at the menu bar at the top. I think it says database. Does it say data or under resources? I reorganized it, so I can't remember. Products and services. I'm sorry. All the way to the right.
Okay, products and services. School database. World order. Oh, database.
Yeah. Now it won't let you in when you click on it. It'll give.
No, that's fine.
Yeah. So what it is it's all the stuff I've been talking about. It's mapped out in a tree or a brain or a web, however you want to phrase you want to use for that type of a graphic organizer. If you've ever seen Richard Grove's
yes,
it's basically the same software. It's the brain software, but I have in there notes, and then I have links, not just to this stuff that Charlotte gave me, but all kinds of memorandums from the department, stuff that she got out of the department and stuff like that. So it's a nice way to support me, and you get basically access to sort of a 3D model of everything in my head and some rare documents that you can't get anywhere else.
Excellent. Well, I'm sure some people watching this stream now or here in the next couple of days will definitely be interested. So please support our brother John. He's doing incredible research. Go join his website, support him continuing his work and efforts uncovering a lot of these topics. So
cool. Thank you.
First super chat coming in over on Dono chat comes from Sumino Coologist. I read Cumby back in the 80s, have an extra used copy. Great stream. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, brother, for the support. Do appreciate that. And
I've got a
go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's a
no.
The copy that I have is I have a super special copy. I'll show you why. So here it is. Signed by Constance, signed to Charlotte. This was Charlotte's copy, Charlotte Iserbeat's copy, and signed to me. So it's got
wow.
I think it's kind of cool.
That's a nice little souvenir.
A ton of the stuff that the books that I got from her are signed by, I open, oh wow, this came from this person. It's kind of
wow.
Cool. Yeah.
That is pretty cool. Harry Serpanos throws in $3 and says, Trump is no savior. We should only put our trust in God and not in human leaders. Trump is the new puppet of the elites. While he cares a bit, his ego is used against him, and he's ignorant about many things. Vance is an ex-military deep state operative. And then he followed that up with another comment, says, Vance is the pale Trojan horse of the elites. I've never trusted him. People need to look into his life history. He was part of the app harvest, which replaced locals with immigrants, and now he promotes himself as a champion of the workers. So
Yeah,
very interesting. I'm not aware of that.
Now he's a Yale guy, right?
Yes, he is a Yale guy.
Now, the reason why we know who these people are is because Charlotte gave these. Her dad, we got these copies. The most recent is, one of them 77. This one's 84, 85. So we don't have lists of the people. What I'm saying is, may or may not be Skull and Bones. Maybe he's Scroll and Key. Maybe he's Wolf's Head. Maybe he's, I would wager that he's probably, I mean, to soar as high as he has in the political sphere, he's probably a member of one of those secret society fraternities, maybe DKE, one of those. And Charlotte had, her dad was also part of, they call it DEEK, so it's Delta Kappa Epsilon, I think, DKE.
Okay.
And one day we were sitting in a room, and I'm looking at the wall. There's this plaque. It's like a diamond, a wooden diamond, and it's got 3 Greek letters. And I said, what's that thing right there? She goes, oh, some horrible thing my father was a part of. She goes, I should probably take it off the wall. And she did take it off. It was kind of funny. I didn't know what DEEK was. And then the theory was that DeSantis, it went around, supposedly DeSantis was part DEEK. But anyways, Yale has quite a few of those secret societies. It wouldn't surprise me. It would surprise me if he's not.
I'd be surprised as well, too. Because, I mean, even his political career, I mean, it's fairly short-lived, and to like you said, rise to the prominence that he has, I would suspect, and then his relationship with Peter Thiel and many of the tech billionaires, I would suspect there's some type of fraternal connection with some of these elites. Next one comes in from Storm the Cat. Thank you so much, brother. Throws in $10. Says, one time I saw a video where this fat evangelical preacher was giving a sermon, and the topic of his sermon was literally praising the brave heroes of the Mossad. I'm not making this up. It was almost like a parody, except he was 100% serious. Sadly, Storm the Cat, I am not surprised by that. That makes total sense to me. And he followed that up with another one saying, did you know that 911 in Latin numerals is IXXI, forms the star of Remphan? I was not aware of that. Thank you for sharing that, Storm the Cat.
If you want to play a little bit with strange numerology, and since we're speculating on what the Trump administration second time around is going to bring, I've thought about this. I don't know. I'm going to put it out there. So 45 and 47, 4 plus 5, 9, 4 plus 7, 11.
Oh, interesting. I didn't pick that up on that. Okay.
Well, and then, in this article, in the first, Hubbard used the phrase new normal quite a few times back in the day. There's actually a book called The New Normal by this communitarian guy, Amitai Etzioni. I got a copy of it somewhere over there. I don't know which one it's on. But the reason that I noted that, I finally ran out of steam and lost my train of thought. Okay. COVID. Oh, oops.
It's all right.
The lockdowns, 2020, right? It was like 2021 is 2001 is 20 years from 20, Agenda 21, Event 201,
right.
Space Odyssey. I'm just saying there's a lot of weird numerology that's kind of, and you have these people using these phrases kind of before. So, I mean, I'm not a person that tries to find the numerology out there, but I would sure that these people like to plan things on numerologically significant dates.
Certainly, it's a central focus of Kabbalah and that type of sort of spiritual magical disposition. So whether we, believe in that or not, I think certainly some people, we'll leave it there, utilize numbers and symbols and in a sort of predictive programming type fulfillment of, just like we said with aspects of Judaism, fulfilling their own prophecies.
Yeah. And the kind of reason why I throw that out there is because basically what you have is like almost 20 years to the date after 9/11, which, by the way, remember there was the anthrax scare, and they came up with I think it's the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act or something like that, where they basically started doing the simulations that went live on lockdowns, pretty much almost 20 years to the date. Then now we sort of talked about, that maybe this administration, as far as Middle East policy, might kind of finish the job that Wesley Clark, suggested. We're going to go to this country, that country, and which, right? When did that start? After 9/11. So, right. Are we closing the circuit in these last 4-8 years? I don't know, but it's something I thought of,
Yeah,
I don't know.
Absolutely. And then, over on YouTube, a major thank you to David James Flood. He gifted 2 COTEL Crew memberships today. God bless you, brother. Really appreciate that support. Shout out to Siege D, throws in $2, says, I like this guy's voice. I now have competition. So you got a fan already.
I was on when I was on the Synaxis podcast. Shout out to Synaxis podcast. Somebody said I sound like John Frink from The Simpsons. That's the guy that goes, who I even I didn't think maybe, I don't know.
Well, at least at our chat here, we have a friend, Baselit Analyzer. He's a literary guy, does tons of reviews on movies and books, and he's got a deep, raspy voice. And they're like, "Oh man, he sounds like BLA." So
I don't know what's BLA. I don't even know what that is. What is that?
Baselit Analyzer. That's his.
You're saying I sound like him. I got you.
Yeah.
Like, what? Okay.
Yeah, they're saying you guys have similar voices. Yours probably isn't as raspy as his. BLA is quite the unique vocal acoustics.
Well, I am trained literary analyst. That is actually my
interesting connection there.
Yeah.
Nadeem Haddad, shout out to you, brother. God bless. Hope your family's doing well in Lebanon right now, and nobody is suffering. He says, hey, DPH, good to see you in the chat. Hope everything is going all right. God bless. Well, thank you very much, Nadeem. God bless you, brother. Austin DeTulio throws in 5, says, here's some cheddar, my brother. Thank you, Austin. Willie Jenkins says, word, Trump is the dang Antichrist. What if there will be a falling away? Well, at least from the Orthodox perspective, he can't be the Antichrist because he's not a Jew born from the tribe of Dan. But at least in our think tank meeting last night, we were speculating, if what were true, all speculation, but if what we're seeing is a sort of brief period of American prosperity that is building this sort of economic engine behind the coming Babylon 2.0, I could see that there's rumors that Trump has a personal animosity towards Bibi Netanyahu because he was the first world leader to support Biden as the legitimate president after the 2020 election, and that he was one of the first ones to sort of internationally legitimize that election, and that irritated Trump to a significant degree. And so he has a bit of a personal animus with him. And we were speculating, I could see a scenario where maybe he's out and somebody of the Jared Kushner type becomes one of the leaders of Israel. And now we have a potentiality, at least it's moving in the right ballpark of somebody coming from the correct descendancy regarding a potential Antichrist. Not, again, we're not going to say anybody is, but that's where people claiming Musk or Trump is, certainly they might be aiding and abetting the building of that system, but they're not the Antichrist.
Have you ever heard of, and I'm not saying there's anything to this, but I've heard this theory. It kind of comes out of this, which British Israelism, their concept of like them being the lost tribes, and that Denmark, Danish, Dan, like they kind of reminds me like Jordan Maxwell, like word games, right? Kind of. But like there's people that have suggested that that Trump has Danish blood, and that could make him somehow of the tribe of Dan, if you go with the British Israelist theory. I don't, I don't know how much I would stock. But I was wondering if you'd heard of it and what.
I have, what's it, Danny Darko, the X channel. He's a big promoter of Trump being the Antichrist. At least from the Orthodox perspective, because I've been reading a lot of literature as of late, probably the last 4 months or so, in regards to the Orthodox saints and elders. And there's, at least when Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu speaks, he believes, he still speaks at the Khazars. And, there's an interesting debate around Ashkenazi identity relating to the Khazars and stuff like that. And potentially some of these Ashkenazis being this sort of lost tribe that's not actually Hebrew, but is of a sort of amalgamation of some Hebrews and a Turkish identity. And it's interesting because if the Antichrist is a full inversion of Christ, it would kind of symbolically make sense that they wouldn't even be of a Hebrew descent from King David. Like he wouldn't even be those people. He would be quote unquote Jewish, but it leads some credence to potentially a Khazarian connection there. And one Russian saint believed that they were going to be born somewhere around Novgorod in Russia. Who knows? This is speculation. One saint out of Mount Athos speculated that, like the Annunciation, the Antichrist may be born of something like in vitro fertilization. And he wrote this. Now, he didn't have that vocabulary, but he essentially insinuated through a non-male seed of potential technology. And he was writing this at the end of the 1600s in Mount Athos. So interesting thought, nonetheless. He didn't have, the terminology of in vitro fertilization, but now where we're at, and as we talked about with all the synthetic wombs and some of this genetic engineering, that could be potentially very interesting. But one of the things that everybody is consistent on is that the conception of the Antichrist will be done through some sort of ritualistic process with a what they refer to as like a ritualistic whore, which again is the inversion of the Theotokos of like pure pious impurity. It would be a woman that's essentially primed and is conscious of what they're getting ready to do, kind of like Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard's attempt, to bring forth the Antichrist. And L. Ron Hubbard's just stuck watching Jack Parsons masturbate and then takes a girl. Anywho, enough of that. Screwed Up Texas throws in 5, says, God bless you, Patrick. Thank you very much, brother. Really appreciate you being here and supporting. Morale Autist throws in 5, says, these ideas, I think that's supposed to be de Chardin, were echoed around the same time by a Russian scientist named, Vernadsky. Yes. He's the one that kind of came up with the idea of the noosphere, that de Chardin. You want to speak on that? Are you familiar with that?
Yeah. Just to say that, he's actually the guy that coined it more or less. I guess de Chardin was more popularized it more in the West, I guess you could say. But yes, correct. Yes.
And then Bill Hicks, back from the dead. Thank you so much, brother. Says, great stream, great guest. God bless you both. Christ is born. Thank you so much, brother. Glorify him. Absolutely. And then our brother, made by Jim Bob, throws in 20. Thank you so much, Jim Bob. God bless you and the family, brother. He says, tell us a funny story from your New Age era. Did you have a New Age era? I don't know. I was going to ask you. I did have one. It may have been directed at me, but I didn't know if you had a New Age era in your life.
I wouldn't have called it that, but that's basically what it was. It was more like, it's like high school. It's kind of like, I guess, into like Wicca, which is the silliest of all of them because it's like this new, it's not like a made up thing. It doesn't even trace its roots back to any particular tradition. But I was actually really into the I Ching too. I was like I read a lot of, I didn't, it's kind of funny because I, obviously I teach college, but actually didn't do very much reading when I was a student in high school, but I did read. I read the whole Bible. I read, Buddhist sutras. I read all kind of Esoteric. I was really into all that stuff. And I was really into the I Ching. I will say that I got some good philosophical insights from it in terms of like, I wouldn't have called it that at the time. But in retrospect, now that I've been through academia and I have the terminology to sort of simplify it, like dialectics and semiotics. Like if you just study the hexagrams, and I would look at them like, I had this thing called the visual I Ching, which was like, it's like a combination of like tarot cards kind of with the hexagram. So they had artwork for each hexagram. And I would sit there and go like, well, why is 3 solid lines heaven? Like, what does that mean? Like, how's it? And then it just, after sitting and staring at them and just thinking about, well, broken line, solid line, and the combinations, it's like, oh, like it was the moment where I realized like ideas are communicated through a medium of symbols, right? And the symbol is not the thing in itself. And the symbol can not just be textual, but it can be like body language and things. Like, I still rely on that when I'm analyzing a lot of the postmodern philosophy and stuff. So it's not really a funny story, but yeah, that's sort of the crux of it. Most of the stories
do you speak Mandarin, or can you read Chinese?
No, I can't.
Okay.
I know you were there, right?
A little bit. I'm not very conversational anymore. It's been now years since I've actually spoke, but I spent 2 summers in China. And I remember the I Ching, the 3 lines regarding heaven. It was explained to us that it has to do with the underworld, Middle Earth, which is China, and then heaven. So those are like the 3 line. Tian is heaven in Chinese. In regards to a funny story, I was trying to think of something that I haven't already confessed to you guys publicly. I guess in regards to my New Age phase, one would be quite interesting. Is I remember at one point I was a massive cannabis smoker, that I bought Shiva themed Hindu rolling papers. And I would roll joints out of my Shiva's themed rolling papers, and all that stuff is now long gone. But that was kind of a interesting connection between my sort of psychonautic. I would say I was a little bit more of a psychonaut than I was specifically New Age, but it overlaps so much it's hard to delineate the two. But that'd probably be one funny thing is, yeah, somebody says L pothead. I know. It was that was a feature of a previous life. So, well, thank God I've grown out of all that.
One thing maybe I should know. I don't know if you can see it on your camera here.
Christ the Eternal Doubt. That was the first thing I noticed in your background.
So that was given to me by a guy. His name is Timothy Honeycutt. He might been on in your chat from time to time. He's got an Orthodox. I think he does like translations. It's been a while. Yeah. So when I went on Jay Dyer's show the first time, it was probably, I don't remember if it was 2020. It was a few years ago. He contacted me because if you see, I think my name, I think I typed it in as Taoist professor. And sort of I'm a catechumen now. I'm an Orthodox catechumen.
Oh, glory to God, brother. I didn't know that.
Is Pano Kurustos in your
yeah, Pano. Oh yeah.
Yeah, he goes to my church, or I go to his church more. It was funny because the day I had been thinking about Orthodoxy for a while. One day I went in there and he was very nice. You know, he showed me around, was telling me about the iconography and the architecture and explaining everything. And I went back and I happened to be doing a show on Rachel Wilson's show. And he happened to be he happened to be in the comments section. He was like, hey guys, like, and so I see him the next day and he was like, hey, I didn't realize, he's like, I thought you looked familiar. I saw you on Jay's show. Didn't realize it was you. And so I was like, I think I'm at the right place. Like, you know, like I picked the Greek one because I figured if I'm going to listen to liturgy in a language I can't speak, I'd listen to it in the Greek, and then I could maybe, if I pick up enough of it, might be able to play around with looking at the Gospels in the original text.
Right.
That was my reasoning. But so sort of my journey there was, you know, so if you buy the book, you'll see that at the end of it, you know, I'm a public educator, and my solutions were kind of like, I was trying to. I don't think the technology is the problem itself. It has more to do with right.
It doesn't have a will. It can't be inherently evil.
Right. So, you know, and there's sort of the postmodern thread and the deterministic thread, and they both kind of come together in technology and all the ways that we've talked about. And I was like, well, really, like, you know, I had started to, I was trying to going back through philosophy, and I started looking at Kant, you know, like trying to get to a way to discuss like metaphysics in an academic setting in a public sphere where, you know, you're not supposed to, you know, promote one religion or another. So if you read it, it sounds kind of perennialist, because I'm trying to suggest that, you know, presuppositionally, right? Like no matter how, whatever we do with technology, the most important thing is that we approach it with the appropriate metaphysics and presuppositions. And, you know, you can see I'm talking about the logos in there. And I didn't know that that was the original, the translation for, you know, John 1:1 right in the beginning was the logos. When I found that out and understood that, right, you know, it can just mean word, but it can also, right, has a loaded, right, Heraclitus's concept. And it's like, oh, wow, like that, like really clicked with me. And, so like it's a very dense chapter, but I'm kind of like trying to come up with a way where maybe we can have that conversation in academia, and maybe that can slowly turn the boat around. But in studying this concept of the logos, the Tao is basically an Eastern kind of corollary in the Heraclitean sense, right? And you know, if you heard the axial age, right, Heraclitus and Lao Tzu are kind of coming up with this stuff around the same time. And in the Chinese, when they translate John, it's in the beginning was the Tao, because that's closer than verb or word, right? You know, Greeks have you know, like rima could mean like, you know, the textual grammatical symbol of a word. So this is the reason why I put that up there, and the reason why I used Taoist professor was because it's a nice little bridge to way for me to talk to everybody, kind of the New Agers, and it's, you know, and it's a nice, it enables you to kind of talk to the New Agers like, you got some of this stuff right. Let me show you, right, the fullness of the faith, so to speak. So that I figured I'd just use the opportunity to, why is his name Taoist professor and all that type of stuff, and you know, so there you go.
Well, I didn't know you're a catechumen. So when you were speaking, I mean, you were like shaking your head and you made comments. I was like, okay, he seems to know Orthodox theology pretty well. Now it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah, I still have some Protestant hangovers a little bit that I want to make sure I get rid of before I convert all the way, because I was raised Catholic, went the New Age weirdo route, then was non-denominational, and then kind of church hopped around the, you know, in the non-denominational sphere. And, you know, over the last years, it got worse and worse. You know, you go rainbow Catholics and social justice sermons. It's like, you know, it looks like a coffee, a
bishops at the prayer service,
all of that. And, you know, and so, and Charlotte Iserbyt, she was traditional Catholic. You know, she's St. Pius, what is it, SSPX? Oh, SSPX, so, yeah. So when she passed, I was like, well, I either need to, that was my two options. I was either going to go, you know, and I'm sure your audience is familiar with everything Dyer's explained about sedevacantism and all that, and why that's, it just, dude, before I even wanted to try it, it's just like, how many schisms are we talking about? Now you got the vegano thing. I mean, there's like, so I'm like, so anyways, so it's been great. I really like, I really love the liturgy. I love the people there. It really refreshes me. It gives me more energy. I was getting really bad burnout before I went there. And actually, you know, it was kind of neat. So I was invited to speak in Moldova by the former deputy prime minister. I spoke out there. He is an Orthodox Christian, and most of the people there were Orthodox. There's a few Catholics and some others that weren't. But one of the things he did was he brought us to some of the monasteries. So I got to see some, would have been, I guess you technically Romanian monasteries, because Moldova wasn't a country.
Right.
But so it was just kind of, you know, it's the New Agers would call it synchronicity. We would call it, right, the grace of the Holy Spirit kind of leading you. I like, you know, I don't mean to, you know, risk prelest here, but I mean, you know, it seems like that's the feeling I'm getting from it, and I think it's
sounds providential for sure.
Yeah. So, you know,
well, glory to God, brother. I wasn't aware of that, so I'm really happy for your catechism, and welcome home. Soon you'll officially be brought into the flock, but God willing, this isn't the case. As a catechumen, if you were to pass away, you're still part of the church. So at least you're in the door. just not a communing member yet. So glory to God for that, man. Really, really glad to hear that. And we can always use more incredible apologists and researchers. I think just hearing you speak, and then I think of Dyer and some of the other people, it's like, it's amazing how orthodoxy is not even 1% of the US population, but online, like on YouTube, the presence it has, it's incredible how much influence it exerts online and online culture, and the quality of content compared to, some of the other flavors that are out there.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, honestly, like kind of, I got to get there, but, and that's kind of why I was mentioned that concluding chapter. When I got to the end of it, I kind of there's a lot of C.S. Lewis in there because I like some of his apologetics. Just, he talks about, practical reason. He uses the Tao as a, but, it was like, I kind of was like, we talked about this. There's a lot of people in the, we'll just call it the resistance or whatever you want to call the people that didn't go along with lockdowns. A lot of them were New Agers. Some of them were lefties, right? And so I was hoping that, Taoist professor and that sort of that attempt at a conclusion, because I knew that when I went into this public sphere of discourse, I would necessarily be dialoguing with a lot of these people from all these different branches, and rather than just battle everybody ideologically, I thought maybe there's a way to maybe there's a way to at least build some rapport, and then later down the line, after I'm fully converted and maybe with the blessings of the church, maybe I'll join you and Dyer in the apologetics realm. I've always been presuppositional in my own reasoning as to why I believe in God and just in the abstract. Like, it was always intuitive to me. So that was another thing that attracted me to orthodoxy as well.
So last question before we get to the last super chat here. You mentioned going to church with Pano. Were you in Lafayette?
Well, he's in, I think it's not in Lafayette. Well, Lafayette is, I fought in Lafayette years ago. I did an MMA fight there. That's like by Purdue, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's way, no, we're in, it's funny. It's in, Cherville, like that.
It's in that general area. So are you in Indiana?
Maryville? No, I'm in Illinois, but I'm in,
okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, the Chicago area.
Okay.
So, if you're in like Hammond and stuff and you turn on the news, you get Chicago.
Well, you're not too far away. I mean, the continental US is pretty big. So in my estimation, if you're within like 3.5 hours, it's fairly close. So we'll have to meet up sometime, grab lunch and meet in person.
Oh yeah, you're not far. You're in Indianapolis, right?
Yeah, just south of Indy.
Yeah, dude, you're not. I mean, dude, that's a cake drive for me. I mean, I told you I used to drive to Charlotte's. That's a 17-hour drive. I drove to Chris Milligan's. That's a 33-hour drive. So 3 hours. Like, if I don't have to go to sleep, right? If I can get there in one trip, that's easy for me. Yeah. So,
well, how far are you from Lafayette?
I don't know. The only time I was there when I went to Lafayette when I fought that time was years ago, and I came from Southern Illinois. I didn't come from Chicago. So I don't know how far it is. I knew it was like 3 hours. It's probably how close is it to Indianapolis?
I think it's about an hour 45 drive for me I'm south of Indy, so it takes me about 30 minutes to get to downtown.
You're probably
hey, that may be a good meeting point. I don't know, depending on where you're at.
I'll come hit you up. I'll drive out there.
All right.
I'm a traveler. Yeah.
All right.
My work is online, so it's probably easier for me to get there than for you to get here. Everything I do is asynchronous online for the most part. So
yeah. Next one comes from our sister Kristen, who is a fellow Hoosier. She lives in the same area that I do. She sends in 5, says, excellent stream. Thank you, John.
Oh, so that's Slow Boy Whiteboard is, the actual person. I've seen that person is commenting.
Yes, I know the actual person.
Okay. It's a female.
It is.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cause she's commented, and said nice things on, how you doing, by the way? Thank you. On a lot of different shows I've done. So yeah.
Yeah, she's deep down the rabbit hole. She knows quite a bit about a variety of topics. So
okay.
Yeah, the Slow Boy Whiteboard is the joke about Jay's whiteboard.
No, I know what it is. Yeah. I've seen that avatar and comments.
Yeah, absolutely. No, she's all over the
Okay.
place online. You'll see her in all types of live chats.
Okay.
But she's a good sister and fellow Hoosier, so always appreciate her. Thank you for the support. And my brother Thomas, Canadian brother, throws in 25, says, excellent discussion, gentlemen. John is a cornucopia of details, highly informative, entertaining. Thank you. You should do this again sometimes. As I said, I'd love to. Maybe the last installment, your fourth article, or we could go over your book one time. Yeah, I'd love to set up some more streams and talk more if you're free. So
anytime.
This has been great, man. I really, really appreciate you coming on. I really appreciate you reaching out about your article, because as soon as I started reading it, I was like, you said, I think this has a lot of overlap with things that you've talked about. Then I started reading it and I was like, wow, it does. And I was not, and still not as you, but as familiar with Barbara Hubbard. So it was interesting to kind of read that article. And then, as I said, I was skimming over the first two articles that you did. A lot of interesting information, and it all ties together. So I really appreciate your research and what you're doing. And yeah, if you're willing, would love to do another one on the fourth article.
Oh yeah, man. Anytime. Thanks for making it happen. We tried to connect a while back, and
I know.
Dude, I've been writing this series I thought it was going to be like, hey, Whitney, what would you like me to write? And I'll write this article a couple months later. I'll be back to education. It's been 3 years. Because you could see all the links. It's 8,000.
All the links, all the hyperlinks, the research.
And a lot of it was tracking down the manuscript, going to see Constance. It's become a book length thing, but I figured, you're busy, and then I was like,
are you going to turn it into a book at the end of it all?
Probably not. I thought, because it's all online. Why? Maybe, but probably not. I don't know who would be interested in purchasing something that's already free online. But maybe I'll just collate it into like an ebook that I can put on the website or something like that. But I'm
sure you'd get some people purchase if you had an ebook like that, and some ebooks allow you to keep the hyperlinks. I'm sure some people would purchase that just so it's all as one resource.
Okay, I'll think about it. But I was waiting for the reason I'm saying that is it was a long time in between anything to even touch base with you to suggest, hey, let's do a show on. So I finally finished this thing, and I was like, and I noticed, you'd been covering Musk, and I said, let me just see if he's available. And lo and behold, it worked out. So very cool.
Yeah. Well, like I said, we're now almost 4 hours in. So what was supposed to be a quick 2-hour convo over your article turned into a 4-hour conversation on basically a wide-ranging array of topics related to the article you put together. So let me know, shoot the fourth article to me whenever you get it done. And when you're available, we'll do another one to sort of wrap up your series and talk more about these things. So thank you again, brother. Really appreciate it, and keep doing what you're doing.
Thanks, sir. Yeah, I appreciate it. Is that the last one, or is there another one?
I think that's the last super chat.
Oh, that's last. Okay, that's what I got. I was like, this sounds like the farewell comment, but I thought there was another super chat. So yeah, all right, man, very cool. Yeah, we'll be in touch, man. And like I said, you know what? We'll have to hang if we're gonna hang out in Indiana. We're gonna have to do it before August, because I'm probably moving. To Tennessee.
Tennessee.
Likely. Yeah, most likely. And probably going to do it in August. So
you going East Tennessee or Nashville area?
That's going to be, I might have a job in Nashville.
Very cool.
I don't want to live in Nashville because it's expensive. I want to try to find something that's not too far out. But what's kind of neat is a lot of people live in Tennessee. I know Jay's out there, Courtney's out there. Yep. I know your audience has a kind of contentious thing with James Lindsay a little bit, but he's out there. I'm friendly with him. I like James. I think he's a good guy. There's a few other people out there too, so kind of neat. Everything's a lot cheaper out there, a lot more affordable out there. So
yeah.
So hopefully that works out, because it'll make.
We'll definitely make it happen before August. Absolutely. Yeah.
I mean, I'll be back to visit family.
Yeah. So once the weather gets warm again, and we'll have to meet up and just have a long lunch, maybe have a drink or two and just chat. Just I'd love to just chat for a while. And you can meet my wife, because my wife will be with me.
Okay, well, I'll try to bring mine. She's not as mobile as me because she actually has to go into the building to work and stuff. But hopefully we can have the wives meet as well. Yeah,
that'd be great, man. Well, thank you again, brother. God bless you and your family. Smash that like, everyone. Thank you all for the support. And I will see you tomorrow. I'll be joining Glenn Lawrence to talk a little bit about kind of general ideas that he has regarding Christianity and red pill and manosphere stuff. So it'll be a really relaxed stream tomorrow. I think that's at 4:30. So I will see you all then. Thank you again, John. God bless you guys. And as always, until next time, God bless.